hello. Please let us know if you can hear us. Hello.
Hello and welcome. Hi.
Just because I'm always suspicious of YouTube, I'm just going to double check myself because I can.
Well, while you're double checking that, I will say today's going to be a fun one because we're tackling one of those subjects that we particularly enjoy. Oh, I've got a sound issue at my side. Let me just stop that. There we go. So I stopped there. So yeah, today's going to be a fun one because we're tackling a subject where Games Workshop hasn't provided an enormous amount of detail. And as you are probably quite aware, we like those subjects because you often find through that scant detail, quite a lot of information can be gleaned, and you can begin to put together a particularly large picture. And this one in particular is going to be, I think, really fascinating because we're not only going to be diving into a subject that Games Workshop don't touch much, forest goblins and all that entails with the forest goblins and their god, but we're also going to be diving into a little bit of greenskin theology and the impact of what something like the good old spider god means to the overall theology of greenskins, and also their position in the whole Warhammer world as to exactly how do their minds work, how do their gods work, or how do other gods work too. There is an awful lot of theological debate that we can have around this one, which I think is going to be super, super fun. So beyond that, thanks all for coming. Have anything you'd like to start with, Sotek, before we go?
No, the only thing would be just I do want to thank everybody that joined us last Wednesday for the first of the Tarmacon Brothers streams. That ended up being a really successful, fun stream, and the discussions that I've seen since have been absolutely incredible in both Discords. Like, I've seen people posting fan art and doing some other fun stuff. So we will touch again on that as we continue with the Slaanesh brother upcoming this upcoming Wednesday on Andy's channel. So make sure you don't miss that because the first one was amazing.
It was really good.
It was excellent. So looking forward to doing that again. But today we've got something a little more gribbly, though with the same important number. Not intentional, but it just worked out that way. This is the week of 8s.
It is. And I'd just like to reinforce what Sotek said there, that the chat that we had concerning the good old Thrones of Chaos and what it was Khorne might look like for the 4 great brothers of chaos that came out from the Tamarkan book, where only one of them actually came out, Nurgle, was really good. There was a lot of great ideas, but I'd like to say in turn that all of the ideas that then spilled out over into Discord were, if anything, even better. So do take a look at those. You'll find most of the conversation for the Khorne brother is over on Sotek's channels, and next week's one, which will be the Slaanesh brother, they're popping over up onto the Lorehammer channels. So make sure you do go check those out because they're just full of fascinating chat. Right, so are we good to get going then?
Yes, we are good to hop into the disclaimer.
Right, so I'm going to start with a disclaimer because I feel this one is worth having because it's a disclaimer I first said about, well, what decade are we in now? 30 years ago. Holy crap. Okay, so this is one that came at a manager's meeting. So I'm going to take you back in time, as I do love doing, all the way back into the 90s. And I was at a meeting where they were discussing savage orcs in particular. Now, savage orcs, if you don't know, are orcs that are savage in that they don't like using technology and they use a variety of savage options instead. Now, to say that orcs aren't already savage is a little bit of a misnomer, but that's how they pitched it. And the good old chap, I shall not name and shame him, he came out and he was being extremely excited about what the savage orcs offered. And he said, well, take a look at these things. They're all covered in feathers and they've got like big, huge tribal masks, just like they've come out of somewhere savage. And my first and immediate response was, yikes, what now? And he said, no, they're really, really cool. He said, like, one of them is this really big shaman. And then he proceeded to do a rain dance to show just how savage and cool these orcs were. And I was like, whoa, Whoa. Not only are Savage Orcs and, by extension, Forest Goblins, which we're going to be covering a lot today, based upon someone else's culture to a degree that's kind of uncomfortable, because the cultural appropriation here, where we are taking someone else's culture, repurposing it for our own needs as the culture that subjugated them in the first place, and using it to make money, is kind of deeply problematic to begin with. And Games Workshop itself, over the course of time, have realized this at different points. You'll find that the Savage Orcs have been dropped, as have the Forest Goblins, in more than one edition of Warhammer, because they are a bit icky when you look at them and don't develop them into something new, something special, and something interesting. Now, we've discussed this before in the past with things like the Lizardmen, where the Lizardmen are very obviously based on a very different culture to the people that created it. But they repositioned the Lizardmen in many ways and turned them, in some respects, into the ultimate good guys of the setting. So it was less, we're turning your culture into the monsters. But with orcs and goblins, they 100% are monsters. They are savage in a way that only colonial people can really describe something, where they look at someone else's culture, call it savage, and then say, we should do something about that. It is not good. So I'm opening with a clean disclaimer, and that is, we are fully aware that forest goblins aren't great, and we don't want to really do rain dances with our savage orcs here, because that's just uncool. But the concept of the forest goblins have been developed. What was originally pitched right at the very beginning, and their original iconography and the way they presented, got developed. So by the time we hit the 8th edition, they are no longer Native American goblins that are considered to be savages. They are their own unique culture with their own unique things. But it is worth saying, as we dive into the history, they didn't really start that way.
Yeah, and it's very, very obvious if you look at the way GW has pivoted since then. Like Savage Orcs in particular have changed rather dramatically. Where going into Age of Sigmar, they completely altered them significantly into something that made a lot more sense and was a lot better. And then when they went back to fantasy, they even stopped calling them Savage Orcs. I think they call them like Wild Orcs now, or they call them like Frenzied something. They have a different name for them now. But that being said, it's always worth acknowledging the sometimes not super great roots of certain concepts within Warhammer Fantasy, which, it was the 80s. But
well, when we go through the history, we'll dive into that a little bit, but we're not going to dwell on the fact that it's quite clearly based on something that really almost defines the terms culture appropriation in a way that is deeply uncomfortable and uncool. We're going to go through what it was, what it is, with a brief mention, but I thought it was super important for us to open up with. We are fully aware of just how actually awful some of this is, but equally, back then, not only were they culturally unaware, they were doing nothing more than, how cool is this culture? I would really like to do something with it for my models. Let's pop them on here.
It was really lazy too. They didn't
even unconsciously, 100% unconsciously aware of what they were doing. But nevertheless, it is where we ended up to today, where we've got something that has not the best roots and is still to a degree being repeated in the same way. And if anything, is now much more problematic than it ever was back then. But even back then in the 90s, we were calling people out for just doing stuff that was wrong, man. But hey, it was the 80s. That makes it fine, right? So why don't we dive into super chats, get through those and our lovely folks dropping bits over on Twitch, and then we can dive in at the beginning.
Sure. So, Swarj, thank you. Good to see you every week. Answer the call, complete the Throne of Chaos. Oh, he's pivoted. He has a new message now.
Oh, I see what you did there.
Morning Crescent, thank you for the bits. We appreciate you.
Spiders.
Spooters. Hammond, it's Wednesday, my dudes. It is not, but that's probably why you're screeching in bizarre text there. Biofoot, maybe Hammond's stuck in the future of the past. We can't be sure. Back in the 90s, during the previous swing music revival, ska, good old ska music. Mr. Pig, the Savage Orcs are the best. Hey, a lot of people do love Savage Orcs.
Yeah, they do.
Like they have developed into something really, really fun, and just kind of, who doesn't love their giant pig armies? Castrated, good morning, Beard Ones. Always love to see you two each Sunday. By the way, what's that interesting box behind Andy?
I have no idea, but it can be pre-ordered right now.
We've never discussed it before.
Never mentioned it.
But yeah, Dark Deeds, go pick that up. There will be links in chat if you want a cool board game for you and your family. CB4 and your friends, and whoever. I don't care. Your enemies as well. Why not? CB4N, we all know the spider god sees with their many eyes, but do even they know the identity of the mysterious hero of Middenheim,
Spider Kremlo? Spider Kremlo. Do anything a Spider Kremlo can? Doesn't seem quite right.
No, it doesn't, because Kremlo's involved, so there's nothing right about it. Jonathan Scott, he speaks the truth. The spider god is Malachor. Malachor. I don't know who he's combining for those. Is it Be'lakor and Malachor becoming one entity? Because if so, that's problematic on multiple levels. Dr. Bloody, I know this is off topic, but I'm updating the Thousand Thrones campaign for my 4th edition. Any recommendations y'all have for it? Good fucking luck would be mine.
Okay, yeah. So, the Thousand Thrones is a difficult campaign. Some people love it. The vast majority of people see flaws in it, and there is a strong vocal part of the fan base that despises it with a strong passion, and they are all right for their own reasons. If you're trying to convert it to 4E, you'll find the actual conversion process is relatively easy. You just run it as spec, but you'll need to just change some stats, and the stats don't need to be changed too much to work well. You just need to upgrade them according to where your PCs are at. But in general, updating the campaign as a whole is a bigger topic, and I would strongly recommend diving into the Lawhammering Discord, pop in there, go into the Warhammer channels and shout help, and someone will come in and almost certainly say, that campaign, oh boy, good luck. And then you can have a good conversation about how best to bring that to fruition. So thanks for that one, Dr. Bloody, appreciated.
There you go. Hammond, but where do the forest goblins get the feathers? Flying spiders?
100%.
Yeah, sure. Totally not from the birds that the spiders catch, because, you know, there are spiders that do that in our world, which is terrifying to think about.
There is.
Much less the Warhammer world. CB4N, Toddy says, bring me pictures of Spider Kremlo. Yeah.
Fist bashing on the desk. Pictures of Spider Kremlo.
Honestly, the level of energy for that character, I think, is appropriate for the energy that should be brought to Toddy whenever he's brought to life in any setting. It's that same level of intensity and anger. Would it be better to base him off the Pharaoh people of Appalachia then? We don't talk about the Pharaoh people of Appalachia, because that's how you get shit like the Jersey Devil or other weird creatures showing up on your doorstep. Just leave them alone.
Appalachia?
I don't know.
I only ask because somebody from there said it was to me, and I was like, well, I'll believe you first.
Listen, I forget that mountain range exists most of the time, and that the stories that come out of there are extremely concerning every time that we have to do a census. But we just like to pretend it's not there. They don't want to be bothered, so everyone just leaves them alone. If they say it's pronounced that way, I'm not going to argue with them.
Yeah, quite.
Singemeister. Yeah, the Savage Orcs being the second closest thing to African peoples in the setting was not great.
Not great.
The first being Pygmy was worse. Yeah.
Singemeister, you're so not wrong.
Yeah, there's a notable aspect of old fantasy in particular where the further south you go, it gets bad and bad and bad. The Snakebite tribe is the new name, I believe.
Snakebite. Isn't that 40K?
Yeah, that sounds 40K to me.
Yeah,
but because the newest thing I know as far as like forest goblins are concerned is that they're just called spider fangs in the in AOS, but I think in fantasy they're still referred to as forest goblins.
Yeah, forest goblins.
Thank you both for your insight and expertise. Well, I appreciate it, Dave. Thank you so much. Just giving my support. Looking forward to Dark Deeds. Me too. I can't wait for that ship.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun.
Have you brought some shinies for Warzag? So you survived the Thunderdome Sotek. Also, are there any greenskins that worship other gods? So we're gonna get into that in a second, because that ties very heavily into today.
It really does.
And yes, I did survive the storms. All the really, really bad stuff was not over me. It was just nearby. It's tornado season. Hooray!
Yay!
It's Appalachia. I'm just gonna say a different.
Appalachia.
I'm gonna say it different every time. Appalachia. Appalachia. All right. So, without any further ado, let's dive into a really weird subject.
Yeah. I have a place where I'd like to begin. And it's slightly outside it going weird. And that's when the forest goblins first arrived, because this is where the spider cult is very first mentioned. Now, I had been collecting orcs and goblins at the time for some time. I had around about 4,000 points of them, for those of you that know points in the old Warhammer game. And we just shifted from 3rd edition into 4th. And the 4th edition had arrived, it repurposed everything, and my army was now useless. As is often the case with the transition from one generation of the rules to another, there were changes. But the changes between 3rd and 4th were massive. It was moving from old generic fantasy into Warhammer for the first time. Now, 3rd edition had lots of things we'd recognize from Warhammer today, but 4th edition is where everything that was Warhammer was nailed down hard into place. And it's also the first time that we get a proper mention of forest goblins. And the first artwork for the forest goblins that was laid out in the 4th edition army list, this is before Mark Gibbons was brought on to do most of the art that passed all the way through most of the fantasy battle army lists. So the first images we got were put together, I think, by Wayne England and John Blanche, maybe. Do I have the book around? Doesn't really matter. I'm pretty sure they were by John Blanche and Wayne England. And they were, let's be blunt, Native American Indians. But greenskins, little goblins, skinny little goblins with feather headdresses, some basic weapons, and shields that looked like they were made with stretched leather or some equivalent. They weren't completely Native American. They were borrowing tropes, but that was about it. And inside the description for the forest goblins was our first introduction to what a forest goblin shaman was. And the forest goblin shaman in there is marked as clearly being part of the spider cult. Now, this is before we've got heavy 40K-isms infiltrating their way back into Warhammer. So they haven't bothered repurposing the letter K to replace C everywhere. So at the moment, it's spider cult with a C. So it's not spider cult with a K to make it orky, right? Got to remember, in Warhammer, orc is spelled with a C, not a K. But they forget about that sometimes, as they K everything up in later editions. And we get our first introduction to the spider cult. Now, this is old Warhammer. We're talking mid-early 90s when this is first released for Warhammer 4th edition. So this is the big box set version of Warhammer. For those of you that are aficionados of the previous editions, that had the elves and the goblins on the front of the box, and had Grom the Paunch, Nelthari, and the Grim, beautiful standee cardboard miniatures. And the first Orc and Goblin army list came out as one of the first batches of the army lists. And it was kind of great because it really brought together all of Orcs and Goblins underneath one umbrella. And it explained what each one of the different sets were. And for the first time, dropped in Spider Riders, it dropped in Forest Goblins, it dropped in the Cult of the Spider. But that was it. It didn't say what the Cult of the Spider was. It didn't go into any great depth as to where it was. It merely said that the forest goblins of the old world largely worshipped, through their shamans, some sort of spidery god thing. And that was as much detail as we were going to get for about 30 years.
Yeah.
Now, various books mention forest goblins. They get dropped at one point. I even remember a discussion happening back in Games Workshop times going, isn't this racist as fuck? Isn't this really bad? And someone going, what? I don't know what you're talking about. It's just, we do this up. Wait. Okay. Wait a minute. I think I might see what you mean. But this was the 90s when this was happening. And not very many people really considered that at the time because that wasn't seen to be racist. In many respects, many people saw it's almost going, hey, look how cool this thing is. Why don't we use all the cool stuff from around the world? Yay. What we're doing is we're basically saying it's brilliant, aren't we? Not necessarily when you make it greenskins. And you say that they're savages. So these savage greenskins from the forests didn't get an awful lot of detail over the course of time. And I'm going to be pretty blunt when I say they didn't change much until the 8th edition of Warhammer. I mean, pretty much at all.
Yeah, they were just,
they were either A, dropped. Let's go to the 6th edition. Forest Goblins gone. They just don't exist anymore. We go into the 7th edition. They're back again. Yay! We got Forest Goblins. But the big issue with Forest Goblins wasn't just that they had a slightly problematic origin, but it's also that they didn't have a unique identity. Night Goblins had a very unique identity. Everyone knew what a Night Goblin was. They had a whole bunch of special units that were attached to them. They had their own special rules. They were Night Goblins, where the Forest Goblins had no special rules for them at all, but they did have Spider Riders. But other than that, there was nothing unique about them. They had no special magic. They had no special stuff. There's occasionally a unique artifact that would say Banner of the Forest Goblins or Web Thing or something. But it was so poorly conceived. It wasn't exactly the reason for them to exist as a whole. They came back in 7th until eventually in 8th edition. That's when everything significantly changed, and for the better, because when we got ourselves not just giant spiders, we got ourselves the Arachnarok for the first time ever, and we got ourselves some pretty deep descriptions as to what the forest forest goblin god might be. But before we go into that, and I'll pass over to Sotek to go into that, because that's pretty much where he dives in and says, this is the gods I know. Before we do that, I'll say there was one other mention that was deeply discussed at the time, but never seen through, and it has survived all the way through to, for example, Total Warhammer 3. And that's on the map that was released with White Dwarf. I'm going to guess 200, as I recall. So that's the big map of the old world. So it's a big map. Everybody knows it if you've done any looking into Warhammer and its history. And in the bottom right-hand corner, right down in the mountains between, on one side, the lands of the dead, and over on the other side, the whatever hell they decide to eventually put there, go up a bit, and we're in Lamia land, and with Libaris and similar. Over there, we've got ourselves Mount Arachnos. Mount Arachnos?
Arachnos, yep.
Arachnos, thank you. Mount Arachnos. And where sometimes said the lost plain beneath that. In other places, it's quite literally the Spider Kingdom. And the Spider Kingdom was deeply discussed at the time because there was a long suggested hint that this is what they were going to do with the forest goblins. They're going to say that they had a unique area where they started and they spread out from, and they weren't just goblins that had somewhat stumbled into a forest and gone, there's spiders there, which is pretty much the story that they had gone with right from the very beginning, and still do, by the way. I'm only bringing that one up to see that there was a suggested hint that they were going to be tied together, but it kind of never happens, and it never comes to place. Instead, we get what 8th edition offers, and that's pretty much where we're going to be doing most of our talking and discussing around, because 8th edition nails down not just the god that they worship to any degree, but it also nails down a huge location of importance to them, and it also reconfirms where the forest goblins largely gather, which is the old world. They are very much an old world culture. They're not a new world culture. They're not a Cathaean culture. They don't come from the Southlands. They come from the old world. And in particular, they are most prevalent in the Border Princes. There's a huge length of forest that starts right all the way up at almost Zufbar, goes all the way down the north of the Border Princes until you hit Tilia at the bottom. And that is where the vast majority of the spider goblins are.
The forest of gloom.
Indeed. And there's a couple of forest names there. I should know them. I've mapped the place several times for Games Workshop. I forget. Having said that, though, the primary area where they end up dropping the main forest goblin god bit, though, isn't here, which I think is vaguely fascinating. It's up in the Drakvold forest. But we will get to that as I pass over to the good old Sotek and say, where would you like to begin?
Except for I'm going to interrupt him and say, not yet, because I'm going to get caught up on Super Chats.
Good idea. See, he's such a grown-up.
Starting for Greenskins need Tenant Four Eyes as a legendary lord, and Snaggler Grobspit as a legendary hero. Start them in the Black Pit to make things even more hellish for Franz and Toddbringer. While poor Franz and Toddbringer, they're drowning in Total War at this point. But I do agree. I would very much like a faction dedicated to the Forest Goblins. There's a lot of stuff they could do with that. That would be super cool. And Tenant Four Eyes would be really nice, as it was one of the weirdest things about the Greenskin book is that they gave them so many characters, but there's not a Goblin Shaman character. All of the Goblin characters that Games Workshop gave them were all bosses. There's no shamans at all. Yep. For the Orcs got a couple wizards because they got like Azhag and Wurzag, but the goblins did not get a damn thing, which is weird in retrospect. So that would be nice because that would give us a shaman legendary lord. Bone Splitters, that's right. That's what their new name was in AOS. The Bone Splitters. The Savage Orc equivalent. They're orcs that have gotten a bit too drunk on Wa energy. Yes, they actually have some really fun lore, and I do like that they posited that a lot of their culture stuff, it just revolves around the hunting of giant monsters. Like, they're kaiju hunters and they love it and it's fun.
Are there any chance green ogres?
They're not horribly dissimilar.
Yeah.
I will say there's a difference. There is a difference, but the ogres also got changed pretty heavily in AOS.
Fair enough.
So there was a little more room. Matt, reminder to update YouTube Music. I've never put us on YouTube Music, but I will put us on all of our other podcast stuff. I'll do that today. I've got some free time later today. Darius Rose. Hi guys. In terms of prey sizes, what is the largest thing a Ragnarok can prey on? Pretty much anything.
Oh yeah. Particularly because the Ragnaroks, we're going to get onto this as we go into depth with, say, Pit and all the rest of it. But the Ragnaroks are not given an upper size limit.
Yeah, their classification is just as big as you want to go. Yeah. Especially when you start dealing with the Black Pit and Mount Arachnos. Jonathan Scott, so you're saying that if we want to meet a god, we need to get bit by a giant spider? Okay, everyone, let's go into the forest like Andy and Sotek said to. No, not a giant spider, a little spider.
Little ones.
You
little
need to
blue ones.
Yeah, you need to look for the little venomous ones.
The squishy ones.
Yeah, go into the forest. Yep, have a good time. Night Goblin, you dare kill an emissary? This is madness. Forest Goblin, madness. This is Black Pit. Punt. AOS Mr. Trick not having Drider style goblins. There's been a lot of rumors that they've been playing around with forest goblins in the background and are wanting to do something with them in the future. They just haven't gotten around to it yet. It's actually quite literally the only part of the Gloomspite gets, which is like just goblins, that they haven't redone yet, because they've redone the night goblins, they've redone all the squig stuff, and they've redone the trolls. So Spiderfang are literally the only thing left.
They're pretty cool.
T-Blam, not the subject of the stream, but if you're a Total War modder seeing this, please, I need a 3 Forgotten Brothers of Tarmacon mod / DLC. I would not envy the modder trying to get that done.
Yeah, that'd be a tough one.
That's a lot of work. Daniel Bryan, hi, y'all are awesome, loving Lorebeards so much, always a highlight of my week. So does the Spider God have any connection with the Eightfold Watcher from Age of Sigmar? There is very potentially a relationship there. Yes. Yeah. Very potentially. Yeah. Sean Soltz, did Games Workshop try to use Shelob from Lord of the Rings or other spiders from other fantasy universes in their model in like the old days for their model range? They didn't have the Lord of the Rings back then.
Yes, they did. Yeah, they did. Yeah, Citadel Miniatures had a Lord of the Rings range. And the Lord of the Rings, I had the old Winged Nazgul, for example, great miniature that came from Citadel. And you'll find that the early Citadel range was not just influenced strongly by Lord of the Rings. It was, in many respects, in some places, them attempting just to make their own versions of it. So the answer is the influence there is definitely very strong.
Yeah. Jonathan Scott, how big do you think Australian Arachnaroks can get? I think it's best not. That's why there's no Warhammer Australia. The Arachnaroks ate it.
Oh, that'd be the land of the spiders, wouldn't it?
They just ate the whole damn thing. These bone splitters sound like slayers. They're not, but I can understand from the very lazy description I get how you could feel that way. But we're not here to talk about them today, so I'm not going to wax lyrical on it. AOS Snotling should build shoddy pump mechas.
I mean, that'd fit Age of Sigmar,
they upgrade. Yeah. Okay, so thank you for all the support. We really appreciate it. I'm going to dive into talking about the actual Spider God now.
Yeah.
So, the Spider God is a character, like Andy said, it's kind of been lurking around the background for a while, but really jumped to the 4th and 8th edition. Because to be clear, like Andy said, the Forest Goblins weren't focused on at all, basically, until 8th edition. They had minis for the Spider Riders, and then they gave them like the gigantic spider mini, and that was it. And even then, the gigantic spider was not necessarily a forest goblin character, because the way they wrote it, it could be like, oh, it's a cave spider, so it's from like the night goblin tribes, or it's just like a regular goblin thing because it's like a spider from over the mountains and stuff. They didn't really go ham on the concept of forest goblins and expand them into their own proper full-on subculture with like some good background until literally the last edition of the game. Which is really interesting looking back on it now, considering how much a lot of people that have come to the fandom since like Total War came out, and since the end times and everything, many people consider forest goblins to be like one of their favorite sub-factions within the game and treat them as if they've been around since the beginning, and really they haven't. I
mean, they were. It's just they didn't have much stuff. I mean, I had a forest goblin unit in the 90s. Yeah, if you're going to look at the goblins, rather amusingly, when it came to the book, forest goblins got as much space as goblins right back in the fourth edition. It's just they got what, two types of miniatures. They got yourself a forest goblin basic unit and a forest goblin command, and that was it. But then you got to also remember back then there was no goblin miniature. Pretty much, they were all night goblins or forest goblins, and that was about it. It was an interesting time, and then they got dropped, which is why Sotek is both right, and I would cut in with but they have been there from the beginning, and I've got the units to prove it. But they're very much sidelined.
When I joined Warhammer, like forest goblins always felt like a thing because the minis were around, because the Spider Riders came out in 6th edition. But as far as what the baseline information, because it's actually really easy to get over it real quick, unlike most of our streams, because like Andy said, GW didn't actually write a ton on them, which is that the story basically goes from the Greenskin book. There is a little more I'll add at the end from a different book, but the Greenskin book basically says that super long time ago, nobody knows how long ago, probably millennia ago, either right when the Greenskin showed up on the planet or maybe right after the Cataclysm or somewhere along those lines, a bunch of goblins work their way north, and the book very much plays around with the idea that the Greenskins are a very adaptable species, and that whenever they go somewhere like into a new environment, many times they will adapt to that environment, and they will become what we would kind of consider to be a new type of goblin or a new type of orc. And the goblins that went into the forests of the old world, and according to some different books, even the new world as well, discovered a bunch of spiders, and initially there was fighting where the goblins, they went into the forest because a lot of goblins, much like the night goblins, don't like the bright sunlight. There's a reason they call it the evil sun, and the moon, even the bad moon, could be very scary as well. And so they went into the darkness of the deep forests, just like some other goblins went into the darkness of the deepest caverns. And the goblins that went to the forest had these early wars with the spiders that were natives to those regions, because the spiders in the deep forest were kind of the dominant species. They were the apex predators. And so the goblins fought with them, and eventually the goblins kind of found a way to coexist with what we understand.
Dominated them, as goblins do.
The giant spiders, where they learned how to beat them, and then they learned how to start riding them and kind of not domesticating, because that's not really what greenskins tend to do, but something akin to that.
Yeah, they're equivalent. So what they did was they drove off the gigantic spiders, took their kids, dragged them back home, and bred them. So they ended up with their own versions.
Yep. And then eventually, though, the goblins, some among them were shamans, greenskins capable of wielding power, which is almost more of a psychic force as opposed to a magical force. It's a little wibbly wobbly, but we'll talk about that in this stream because it's pertinent to what we're going to be discussing. And the shamans started to experiment a little bit. And some of them would realize that as they were living in the forest and dealing with these spiders, they realized that if certain kinds of spiders bit them, it could cause really intense hallucinogenic visions.
Goblins love their visions.
They do. Greenskins love visions. That is like their favorite damn thing in the world. If you read any book that has a greenskin perspective, there's probably a vision scene somewhere in it. But among these various visions they were getting, the forest goblin shamans would talk to other goblins about how sometimes when they'd have these visions, they'd hear something. Like they'd hear like the scuttling of creatures and the whisper of webs, and there seemed to be some kind of voice calling out to them. And some of them began to posit the idea that there was a many faceted eye creature out there trying to talk to them, to connect with them.
And when you look at that as a lovely starting position, and then you also combine that with the big issue that the forest goblins were facing, you can begin to see where the spider gods started to become a thing. Because for all they had managed to dominate the gigantic spiders, there was a particular spider they not only couldn't dominate, they could get nowhere close to dominating. In fact, it dominated them. And they only had a single thing that they could do whenever they encountered one of these blessedly rare entities, and that was to run. That was it. They had no other plan. They didn't have a let's hang around and poke it plan, because they got eaten. They didn't have a let's try and do something with it plan, because they also got eaten. Entire tribes of forest goblins are being wiped out by the occasional interruption with their daily activities with gigantic versions of the spider kind, the Arachnaroks as they're now called. And these Arachnaroks were bluntly impossible for them to deal with, just completely beyond them. And to give you an idea, the army list has got one nice little let's say snippet of an idea for just how nasty they are. If you consider yourself as a handy little old worlder denizen, okay, so you are, Johan the Old Worlder, making your way through the good old world forest, and you've settled down in a nice little village, and you're like, this is the life. We're away from the worst that civilization has to offer. We've got our nice little village. There's a couple of hundred of us here. Everything's great. And then one morning you wake up and you find out that your entire village, end to end, across it, all round in one enormous circle, is webbed by enormous webs, each one at least the thickness of an orc's arm, and also beyond sticky and also venomous. So if you touch that, you get stuck to it, and it pretty much dissolves your innards for the spider later. And there's no way out because you can't fly. That would be a nice way out. There isn't a way out. The entire thing's webbed end to end. And then the Arachnarok will come as and when it wants, and it will eat everything in that village, and there's nothing it can do. And this happens. It happens to the greenskins, it happens to humans, it happens to other cultures too. It's pretty much impossible to get through this stuff. The Arachnarok is, in terms of giant spiders, actually terrifying. They're enormously fast, they're enormously agile, they're enormously, well, I wouldn't necessarily say enormously smart, but they're definitely cunning, very good predators. And when it came to these, the forest goblins were bluntly screwed.
Yeah, and so, I mean, these things could wipe out an entire greenskin tribe by themselves and eat the whole thing. And goblins, to be frank, I mean, greenskins in general respect that kind of power, and also are terrified of it. And this was the situation of that the goblins were basically not able to deal with the Arachnaroks and just had to avoid them until a very particular development happened. And that is that there were some very clever little forest goblin shamans who, upon having all of these strange visions, became more obsessed with the idea of trying to make contact with whatever they felt was on the other side. So, being goblins, though granted, I could imagine easily some humans doing this as well, instead of trying to avoid getting bit by venomous spiders, they started collecting venomous spiders and purposefully getting the spiders to bite them to try and induce the ideal vision and experimenting, which led to the deaths of countless shamans. But eventually they discovered the best one, which was this little tiny spider that has what looks like a skull on its little body, and it's called the purple venomback spider.
Skullback.
It's called
purple skullback.
Skullback. I think it's venomback in one book.
It's skullback in the army list. So,
I wonder if there's. Well, it doesn't matter. So this little spider, if it bites you, I mean, for a human, it's gonna be a bad time. But for the forest goblins, for the forest goblin shamans, who had kind of built up a tolerance to these kind of things, it basically caused them to have a seizure. And
I think there's probably one other detail we want to add here, because there was a slight step that they made to reach this point.
Yeah, go ahead.
And this, when you consider the shamans of the orcs and goblins, consider them effectively like the spiritual leaders. They're the ones that are in contact with Mork and Gork. And they are the ones that are leading their people when it comes to matters that they don't understand, where the gods themselves can perhaps give them a hand. And when it came to these spiders, they had literally no way of dealing with the big ones, none. And they had appealed to Mork and Gork and got nowhere. They had done literally everything that they could. They turned to their shamans and said, help. And it was the shamans who came up with the first idea of, well, perhaps we should treat them in a similar way and not just put up symbols to Mork and Gork, but also put up spider totems to effectively say, look, we recognize you're here. Thump, spider totem, please leave us alone. And the unexpected thing was, it sort of worked.
Yeah,
and that's what got them going. Well, there might be something to this, particularly because they've been having these visions already. What if there's an actual god here that we need to deal with? What if there's another step here? So the good old purple skullbacks, or whatever they might be called, spiders, granted them access to something that was already a step-by-step process they were going through, which is they'd already slapped down their totems. They've been trying to ward them away. And if you went through the forest, you'd find large areas were penned out where the forest goblins just didn't go, with huge marks of Mork and Gork and Spider and Mork and Gork and Spider all the way around them, penning in those areas where the massive Arachnaroks were.
Yeah, they also started making offerings to the Arachnaroks. The greenskins, the shamans were like, okay, we need to try and placate these things. So they would like take bound captives and throw people into the areas where the Arachnaroks are, or into their dens. And over time, they started being able to get closer and closer and closer because the Arachnaroks grew more tolerant of them. And it's also supposed in the book that it could be that the Arachnaroks were just getting their food, so they weren't as eager to just go out and hunt. Because why hunt when the food's coming to you?
Yeah, totally.
And eventually the shamans were able to get close enough that their visions, they believed that they could use their visions to talk to spiders. Where some of the forest shamans felt very strongly that if they allowed themselves to go into these visions, it gave them the ability to speak spider. And for the spiders to tell them things and for them to command the spiders, which may or may not have been true at the time.
In fact, it gets even worse with some of them. They don't just think they can speak to spiders. They actually think that these venomous things that they're letting bite them, these little plum-shaped horror things that they're getting into their... Anyway, these spiders are literally granting them access to the great beyond. The great place where the spider god itself hungered beyond reality itself and looked in with a great abiding need to prey. And they were effectively tapping through to it, connecting with it, and through that connection, they believed in turn, hopefully influence the Arachnaroks. And if you are a believer in such things, you would then presume that, if that were true, that our spider shaman would just, wander up to one of the great pits of these horrendous creatures and do some sort of stupid dance, and the spider would listen. I mean, that's not going to happen, is it?
Yeah, to be fair, calling it a dance might be a little a little gracious. So
convulsive rhythms, because they're high as kites.
So there was at some point a shaman who approached an Arachnarok, allowed himself to be bitten by one of these purple skullbacks, and he has what's a mixture of like a horrible seizure and also a transcendental experience. And it notes that the Arachnarok watches the goblin move and do all the stuff and make all these noise, and it becomes entranced. The Arachnarok just watches and watches. And when the goblin finishes, the shaman felt confident that he had made contact with the Great One beyond, the Feaster beyond.
The Feaster beyond.
And said, all right, we're good with this spider. And the terrifying thing was, he was right. Yep. The Arachnarok tolerated the goblins, let them move into its nest, start to build. I mean, it'd eat them, but
not instantly. This is a development of potentially centuries.
It took a hot while, but eventually they were able to move in to the Arachnarok layers. They started building platforms on their backs, building shrines to the great spider god on their backs. They built war machines on their backs, and the Arachnaroks put up with it. They allowed the goblins to tend to their brood nests, to tend to their eggs and their children. And it led to this horrifying realization of the goblins were right.
Yeah. So,
which opens up a horrifying concept.
Okay. So, if we then break free from the text and say what's happening here, because it's pretty easy to do. What we have ourselves is here as a goblin tribe. Let's just say that we've got the archetypical first goblins that are doing it. We don't know which tribe was responsible for first doing this great communication. But let's say we are now talking about this individual tribe. This goblin tribe is doing what greenskins do. It is sinking into the local environment and finding a place for it to scurry away and hide in. It scurries away into the forests, it hides in the darkest parts, and it finds out that there's something worse back there already. Now, there are lots of terrifying things in the forests of the old world. It's not just the big, gigantic spiders that they have to worry about. But in particular, these goblins had almost culturally identified themselves with spiders because they'd managed to tame them. They had managed to get them to do what they wanted. But there was this huge example that they couldn't control. So they did what most sentient species do when there's something that's beyond their control. They deified it. This is not an uncommon thing. No matter which one of the sentient species you look at, this is what they do. They very quickly deified it. And through eating these, they weren't eating them per se, but they're putting these plum-sized spiders in their mouth and letting them bite their tongues, and they all got swollen. Man, most of these golden shamans that did this died, but some didn't. And through the process of their, let's call them,
they get the big purple tongues.
Big swollen tongues. And through the process of this poison imbibement, some few survived. And through that survival, you could argue several things occurred. The most obvious one, and the one that is the most obviously Warhammer, is that they break through from the material realm into the aether, and by moving through into the aether, they can then communicate with a deity that would normally be quite beyond them. And beyond them for more reasons than it's worth just simply stating is, oh, it's the aether in the material realm. You can't really cross that, can you? There's 1,000 ways you can do it if you know what you're doing in the Warhammer world. But not for greenskins. Greenskins are different. Greenskins don't do the whole, channel the winds of magic and do the god thing. They've got Mork and Gork that's an expression almost of themselves and the way that they interact with the material universe. Mork and Gork are literally their deities, but the spider goblins did something different. They broke through to a different god. Now, to other orcs and goblins, this is not necessarily going to be perceived as a good thing, but you've got to remember that they don't really have a strong sense of theology. They're not just sitting there saying, our gods are the only gods. It's just, they're our gods. And then they meet these spider ones who say, yeah, they're also our gods, but we have this god too. Watch. Ba-da-ba! Spider comes out. They go, yep. Fair call. Yeah. All right. And they move on. Orcs and goblins, they're super pragmatic. They're not really, prone to having their own internal inquisitions. That's not really how they work. So we've got ourselves a group of forest goblins, with the most obvious answer would be that they have managed to break through the aether to enter a realm of, and it's clearly mentioned in more than one place, spider demons. Yeah, they use the term spider demon more than once. Yeah. And you're just left going, ginormous spider entity from beyond that is hungry. And the goblins are happy to feed it.
Yeah, there are what the shamans did, and one of the scenes that always makes me laugh a little bit because of some jokes I'm aware with various cultural aspects in the US is, like, for those who know what the Hat Man is.
What's the Hat Man?
So the Hat Man is a concept where people that take like way too much like Benadryl to either help them sleep or to get high or whatever, you can get a bad trip, which has a very, very well-known terrifying symptom called the Hat Man, which is that when people get really, really high on this kind of drug, they envision a horrifying individual being around them, like a shadowy person, and it's known as the Hat Man because it's terrifying. So don't overdose on Benadryl, kids. Anyway, so the thing about it that's very bizarre is that the forest goblin shamans make mention of that when they would have this venom and they're hearing the voices, that they perceive shadow demons in the forms of spiders or spider-like that are creeping around them, and these are the things that are often whispering to them and telling them truths about the spiders. And the thing is that the greenskins are not just hallucinating in the goofy haha sense where it's all fake. These are actual truths. These are things that inform them on how to wrangle certain kinds of spiders that are really rare, or how to appease certain kind of spiders, or how to use certain kinds of spells. Because one of the things that is often asked a lot about, and the game implies but doesn't necessarily show very well, is that in the Greenskin book, you have the lore of the Big Wa and the lore of the Little Wa, which is like essentially goblin magic and orc magic. But within the goblin magic, if you read it and look between the lines, it's kind of split between essentially like night goblin magic and forest goblin magic. And forest goblin magic is terrifying because they have spells like Scuttle Tide, or they have spells like oh my gosh, I can't remember what it's called, or like Itchy Nuisance, or the spell that gives them poison attacks, which I can't remember what it's called.
I'm just gonna go check it up because it's annoying me.
These spells are quite, when you read the text that
Gift of the
describes,
Spider
like,
God, is it that one? Gift
of the Spider God.
Spider God, that's it.
Which, like, that's very on the nose. It's a gift from the Spider God, which causes their weapons to literally start dripping with spider venom. This is a god that's performing miracles, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what I find particularly annoying with the army list version of it is that people tend to look to the army list and go, well, that's Orc and Goblin magic, isn't it? So it's all big Wa and little Wa. But that's just a bit of a misnomer. No, this is pretty much the Goblin version of Mork and Gork and the Orc version of Mork and Gork. And as it turns out, if you look at the little Wa, it's not even that. It's the Goblin version of Mork, Gork, and the Spider God. And arguably even the Bad Moon, if you want to view that as a completely separate thing too, which is
fair. Like
100%.
Yeah, like to be clear, there are tribes out there that either see the Bad Moon as a god, and some even see the sun, the evil sun, as a god.
Absolutely. So if you were breaking this up for the role-playing game, you wouldn't make a little Wa spell list, because that makes no sense at all. You would make lists of spells for each one of the different god types that the orcs and the goblins have, and that would make more sense for the goblins and for the orcs. But you tend to find that's not how these things are particularly well translated. But that's how they would translate all other magic over in Warhammer, which is why I find it slightly distressing. And this also answers another one of the questions that you often get about forest goblins, and that is, why don't they have their own spells? They do. It's just they've not been properly developed into a complete list that is unique and of their own, because they only have 2 spell lists in the Orc and Goblin army list, at least the 8th edition one. And that's where it started. And people tend to just replicate that as they move from various licensed games to various new editions. They will just go, yeah, it's little Wa and big Wa because it's an easy separation. It is, however, I think, a very artificial separation, and one that when you even look at the spells involved makes you realize, oh, these should be in separate lists. Because if I'm playing with forest goblins, I shouldn't have any of these other spells. If I'm playing with night goblins, I shouldn't have these forest goblin spells, but they're all lumped together because that's the way that it works. But before we get off on that one, and before we dive into Super Chats again, because we've got a good chunk coming in, and I think we need to do so, I think it's worth saying that there is more than one interpretation that we can have about these quite ridiculously high goblins. The next one is to say that god doesn't exist at all. And the way you do that is you would take this angle instead. They are getting super, super, super high. And if there's one thing that you can say for certain about goblins is, and greenskins as a whole, they generate magic. That's pretty much how they work. They generate magic by getting together and getting excited. And warfare is one of the ways that expresses for orcs. For goblins, it expresses slightly differently. Warfare is a component of it, but it's excitement and also fear for their own death, which generates their own Wa magic. And as they're all getting around this goblin that's swaying away and getting high, they are generating magic. And that singular shaman, who is the focus of all of their Wa energy, has one desire in mind, and that's to control the uncontrollable. And he does. So you could easily argue that this is nothing more than a manifestation of orkiness or greenskinness or goblinness, whatever you want to say, in its classic sense. And that is, it's nothing more than a generation of Wa energy, which is then channeled through a shaman. And the shaman, who fortunately in this case hasn't died, taps through to the huge spidery entity on the other side. And you could argue that what it's seeing in the great beyond and the great hunger and everything else is nothing more than a connection through to the Arachnaroks themselves. Massive entities that are bluntly terrifying. So they could be the source of the terrifying god. And not so much it being a god itself, and it's nothing more than the goblins controlling and contacting the Arachnaroks. That would also be a completely legitimate answer for the situation that sits up before you. However, as you often find in Warhammer, the second that you got one, you sort of got the other. Or if you've got the other, you've kind of got one. They kind of bleed a little bit here or there. So regardless of where it ends up, and I can give you, if you wish, another 2 or 3 different explanations for how this could all make sense.
We'll get into those.
We're going to be getting into those as we go, almost certainly. Regardless of what the actual truth is behind it, there are certain things we can say for certain. There are spells associated with this god. definitely. There are powers associated with this god. There are goblins that worship this as a god. There are goblins that not only worship it as a god, but do so not to the detriment of Mork and Gork per se, not necessarily even side by side, but in some cases, they just don't bother with Mork and Gork. It's the spider god or nothing for them. So this is a god. Don't try and say, oh, it's just something they made up. Yeah, no, it's not. You could argue it is, and you could make a good argument for it. But in the Warhammer world, every single time you try to say, well, that's not really a god, is it? And the next writer comes along and says, so this god fucks everyone over and eats everything. Because Warhammer writers like to dial everything up to 11. They can't help themselves. Their first default is, let's have a god wander in and screw everything up. And this is a god that the Warhammer world has had since the early 90s. There is no chance it doesn't exist, and I will give you the immediate proof. That's Age of Sigmar, where it quite clearly has translated.
Yeah, I mean, hell, just looking at I was looking at a note about the purple skullback spiders, and it quite literally says, when forest goblins are bit by these, their connection to the realm of the spider god grants them extremely heightened magical abilities.
Yeah.
Which, like, oh.
I mean, if you wish to be less kind, they're worshiping a demon god.
Yep. All right, we'll hop into that in a moment. Charles C.K. in the old Orcs and Goblins FAQ, Sotek. Oh, yeah, but way back in the day. So this, yeah, we'll talk about this. It's really interesting thing. Sotek insisted that Wa energy wasn't a thing in the fantasy, and they frenzied up the winds of magic. Has that idea been refined? My understanding of the idea has been refined, yes. And it is, to be fair, it is a very complicated subject. The way greenskins use magic. Because especially it's not helped that if you don't read some very specific sources, you won't know that. You will operate purely under the understanding that greenskins use magic like everybody does. Because the vast majority of authors do not explain how wall magic works properly. And that's just because Games Workshop didn't like sit them down and be like, all right, this, you need to make sure you do this right. Because when you read like the army book, you'll just be like, oh, they have lores of magic, so they must be using the winds of magic. And you read like their descriptions, you read the Black Library books, and a lot of them will just purely leave you with the impression that, yeah, they use magic, and it's just, it turns the winds of magic green and yada yada. And you even get stuff like, oh, and when there's like a lot of green skins, they draw in the winds of magic and do some other weird stuff. It's not until you sit down and read like the roleplay game, which delves into a lot of the very specific details, and you delve into older books, which also allow you to see the evolution of it, where you start reading things about how the greenskins have an impact on the winds of magic. But when other wizards see what greenskins are doing, it doesn't make any fucking sense.
Yep.
Like when wizards are looking at greenskins casting spells, the elves are watching it. They're seeing the greenskins do stuff that literally defies explanation. And I mean, we're talking about elves that see like human priests calling upon the power of the gods, and the elves are like, okay, that's weird, but we can kind of figure out what they're doing. Whereas they look at greenskins and go, I have no fucking idea what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think that should be stated and reinforced. Many authors don't understand it, so thus it gets muddied. That doesn't help. Games Workshop doesn't understand it, so it gets muddied. That doesn't help. Games Workshop has had different views at different times because different people have been in control of what should be said, and they all had their own views, meaning that some writers have come along and said, so are you telling me it's basically like WoW magic from 40k? And they get told, no, it's the winds of magic, man. And they go, right, okay, how do I write that? You know, just say the casting magic and stuff. And they do. And then the next time they go in and they say, right, so they're just casting magic and stuff. But the next person who's in Games Workshop says, dude, no, they generate Y energy. What are you talking about? That's nothing to do with the winds of magic. They generate their own wind effectively, and that's what does it. Mork and Gork's real, man. Get with the picture. And then the writer's left going, okay, well, that contradicts what I was told last time, and that was only a year ago. So give me a moment while I try to refigure out how to do my next book. And then in their next book, to ensure that their first book doesn't contradict their second book, they fudge over it again. So you'll find the writers have as much problem tying this down as, for example, the different people who may be reading it and attempting to make sense of it. But if you go behind the scenes and you look at it all, it's pretty clear what it is now, even though it wasn't clear what it was in the past. And it is very clear that they've gone back to the 4th edition version of Warhammer, which is arguably even the same as what came before. And loosely, it's the foundation point of what 40k later took. And when they had the Here We Go books and all the rest of them, is they're generating their own Red One Go Faster style magic. And that's that orcs generate their own magic. Much like the Icewind of magic, its origins are not necessarily detailed for clear, and that's probably for the best because none of the writers out there really have access to all of the lore at their fingertips. So if they try to pin it down, they might not do it in a way that makes sense with everything else that exists out there. But we can say for certain that orcs do generate magic. Now, is that the winds? Not really, but could it be an adaptation of the winds? Could it create Dar? You certainly could make it do that if you want. So Sotek wasn't wrong. Sotek was correct in that interpretation, but the overall picture now has moved on. The old world has made it very clear. They generate their own magic.
Yeah, and I disagree with my older self, but only because he didn't have all of the information at his fingertips. Which is,
and it's in fact,
you're working with that.
and I think I think that is a perfect example of the troubles that Games Workshop writers have also had, because Sotek, in all of his enormous wealth of knowledge that he had, looked at the whole thing and went, "No, it's this. It's clearly this," but it wasn't, because he didn't have access to all of it. And that's what the writers were doing as well. Think of a writer coming in with the same amount of knowledge that Sotek had. He had tons, and he quite cleanly writes a world in which the orcs are adapting the winds of magic. And then Sotek comes on the outside, reads it, and goes, "Yeah, I was right, see?" And that's why that sort of thing can be developed.
Yeah. Now I find it's a lot more fun to look back at those and work backwards now with the knowledge, like, because when you read, like, for instance, the Storm of Magic book, it very clearly talks about how, like, oh, the greenskins harness storms of magic just like everybody else does.
Yeah,
they have cataclysm spells just like everybody else does. And when you initially look at that, you go, okay, so they use the winds of magic like everybody else. But now I look back at that and go, no, okay, if that's not true based on my understanding now, so what could be happening here instead? And that allows me to operate with an idea of, like, oh, well, maybe when a storm of magic is happening, it's causing breakdowns in, like, essentially the quote unquote, like, defense system of reality to keep reality imposed. And maybe that weakening allows greenskin Wa powers or their psychic energy to present more cleanly, to present more ferociously, so they can take advantage of a storm of magic, but not in the way that everybody else does. And that makes for a really fun story. But yeah, greenskins, and they are much more fun, and frankly, they make a lot more sense if they don't harness the winds of magic.
Yeah,
because frankly, they, like, greenskins, it wouldn't make a lot of sense for them to be able to grow magic in power if there's more greenskins without that helping their enemies. And, like, their enemies have wizards that are thousands of years older than them and more powerful than them. So, like, it's like, how are these shamans, like, overwhelming, like, the likes of named elven characters at spellcasting? Because they're not using magic.
Because the power of the Wa.
Yeah, they're using.
Oh yeah, loads of goblins together are a bad idea. Loads of orcs together are a bad idea. Break them up fast.
Yep, CB4N, Johan the Old World sounds a little dodgy. Yeah, he does.
He does.
Is the spider god the god of dreams or something else? So one of the things that's, I can see where you're going with that. I would say no, but I could see where you're going with that. What is interesting, and something we'll discuss in a moment, is what is the spider god independently? Like, what is it separate from the greenskins? What domains does it have reach over? Because the answer could be much broader and more frightening than you may think. Because gods are messy in Warhammer, which I think there's actually one of the things, another old opinion I used to have that I no longer agree with old Sotek on, is that old Sotek read essentially, like, the Liber Chaotica and like the 7th and 8th edition army books, especially the Demons of Chaos books, which very cleanly and flat out just say all gods are manifestations of emotions felt by sentient beings in the ether, period. And you go, okay, and you start working with that. And then as you get older and you read more and more holes start to get poked into that web where you go, wait, okay, how does Urson make sense as an emotion? Or like, and you're like, okay, well, maybe it's emotion and concepts, but now you've got a hole poked in there. So you go, okay, that's fine. And then you run into something like the spider god, which seems more representative of like a series of creatures. And you hear mentions of other gods that seem to manifest as these godly representations of creatures. And you go, okay, well, is a creature a concept, or is it just that like these creatures have their own god? So there's another hole poked. And then you're like, okay, wait, now rivers and trees and mountains have gods that are independent of their worshipers. Okay, well, that's another hole poked. Oh, wait, gods can be completely forgotten and then they can come back later, even though no one's worshipped them for thousands of years. There's another big hole poked. And you quickly learn that, okay, yeah, no, the emotion thing doesn't make sense. That makes sense for some gods, but for many of them, and the spider god would be one of these, there's something different there, which I like because it's significantly more unsettling. Because if you have a simple idea of like, oh, well, gods are just emotions, that makes them too easy and they kind of cease to be godlike, in my opinion. Whereas the spider god introduces this concept of, okay, there is a really horrifying spider-like entity that is horrifically clever. Like it is deviously clever, intelligent even. Like the greenskins are awed by the intellect on this thing. And
no, go
ahead.
I was just going to say, just before we lose track on the what are the gods thing, it's worth noting that particularly when you move through 8th and you move through the Liber Chaotica, a lot of that was strongly based on the Realms of Chaos books, who had a couple of very strong chapters that were applicable for both Warhammer and Warhammer 40k, because those books were for both settings, because back then both settings were intrinsically linked. And the concept of emotion being source of godhood was very strongly put into place there. And the gods that those books were dealing with were the 4 great powers of chaos in particular. And other gods were given short shrift because it wasn't about other gods. But the Warhammer world in particular, much less so 40k, although 40k's got a bit of it here and there, but the Warhammer world in particular has a variety of, now, if we wish to just shift language slightly, it perhaps makes a bit more sense, etheric entities that exist in the aether. The aether being effectively the warp of 40k under a different term. But this is the realm of chaos, the world of gods, the divine realms. There's many different names for it as you've got different species. And over there in the aether, the primary stuff, the primary thing that makes things move, consider it like the wind in the real world, is thoughts and emotions, is sentience shifting. If there's no sentience, there's no movement in the aether. But the Warhammer world is filled with sentience. So it's not just emotion, it is thought. And emotion is a part of that. And extremes of emotion can cause extreme eddies to form inside the great swirl that is the aether. But thought itself does things over there. And that is expressed also when it comes out of the aether into the real world with the wind of Hysh, which is the wind of effectively intelligence in many respects. There's a lot more to Hysh than just that, but intelligence is rooted in it. And that's because that comes directly from the aether. That it's a core component of the aether, the most diffuse, the one that's literally everywhere and through all things, is also the most powerful one. And there's a reason that Hysh is more powerful, again in heavy quotation marks here, than any of the other winds. That's because when it is eventually concentrated, it's devastating, because the devastating effect of intellect on the aether is fundamental. So there's a lot going on there. There's a lot we can discuss, but loosely here, is it a god of dreams? Absolutely not, I would suggest, although it's quite clear that the hallucinogenic dreamlike quality that the spider's venom has upon the goblins have allowed them access through to that which lies beyond. But it doesn't sit there going, dreams, man, yeah, they're cool. It's a very different type of entity. Plus, there are several gods of dreams as well, whether you're talking Sariel or alternatively Mor. There's a bunch of them out there. Yep. Wow, we did a lot on that question there.
We did. Phil, so many things you can do with forest goblins, giving them different types of nasty woodland critters like badgers, owls, or caterpillars, and fun mutations based on those critters for the gobos. They could even use those critters to spy on and manipulate societies around them, something more so you expect from greenskins. So, a couple things that, and I'll let Andy go off. I see he's got something over the comment here. I will note that greenskins using little critters to spy on you, the forest goblins can do that, which is because the forest goblin shamans in some stories can literally talk to spiders when they're in these states, and they have spiders spy on people, and which is horrifying, because think of how common spiders are and how they're around you literally all the time. And there are some forest goblins that are able to use that to their advantage. But furthermore, the other thing I'll really note with this is that with forest goblins, I would say it'd be fine for them to have other arachnids or things that are very closely related to spiders, but you'd want to keep the concept fairly tight, or else it starts to kind of devolve into something that loses. It gets a little too fatty. I think you kind of want to keep it trimmed up. And the mutations aspect, I'm kind of greenskins with mutations are pretty rare. Now, why this depends on what author you're talking to. I've read some books where the authors say that greenskins are, because they're such a fighty culture and they're always constantly looking for anyone to express weakness, most mutations are a weakness, so it results in the greenskins killing the greenskin that's mutated because he's weaker than the others and he just gets eaten. Some greenskins are a little more view it as like some kind of corruption and are kind of like, no, bad. But there's also like the Skarsnik book, which has a delightful character who is a greenskin that was born or emerged too close to a big hunk of warpstone, and he's got 2 heads. And the greenskins kind of look at him and go, well, he's kind of weird and he's pretty stupid, but he's got 2 heads like Gork and Mork, so I guess he's cool.
I think that's a far more realistic outcome, because you've got to realize that the orcs are not particularly judgmental. Greenskins just aren't. They're not ones who sit there worrying about corruption or any of that bullshit. I think that a better way to always view greenskins and mutation is that it's just really very rare because they don't mutate normally. It takes something relatively exceptional for it to happen. And there's very clean in-game justification for why this is the case, because they literally generate magic. They're like magical batteries, and that magic releases under the correct circumstances. But it also means that it's very hard for external magic to affect them. Now, that doesn't mean that spells can't affect them. That's a very different type of situation. But something like Warpstone or the perverting, effects of Dar or whatever, it just kind of doesn't do anything to them. They don't like it. The number of times you get a story with greenskins that are moving through somewhere that's chaos, and it just makes them hyper depressed and scared because it's scary. Chaos is wrong, and the orcs feel how wrong chaos is.
Yeah, greenskins are often shown to be very sensitive to magic.
Yeah, they feel it because they're sensitive to magic. Exactly. When they're going through somewhere that's spooky and strange, they're like, "Oh, I don't want this, boss," because it's spooky and strange, and they sense it because they've got an inherent magical awareness in a way that would make other species very surprised if they were quite aware of just how sensitive they are. But broadly, I think the best answer is always that greenskins only very, very rarely mutate because they're naturally anti-mutation.
Yeah, also, don't touch badgers. Those belong to the halflings. I love halfling badger riders. Leave them alone. And owls show up all over the place. Owls have a ton of stuff.
Hey, New Blood Bowl makes badgers a gnome territory.
Yeah, well, that's true. No, we'll allow the gnomes. We'll allow the gnomes. Singemeister, handling dangerous, venomous creatures is a matter of faith. Inspiring visions, maybe Hammond was right about the appellation. Okay, so for anyone that doesn't know, this is a reference to Andy. Do you know what snake handling is?
Yes.
Yeah, so for those unaware, there are some rural areas of America that are a little fucking insane, and they have Christian preachers often who will literally handle snakes to demonstrate how blessed they are by God, and they'll literally allow snakes to bite them. And yes, many of them have died because of this. It is the dumbest fucking thing in the universe, but
yeah, well, people are gonna people, aren't they?
People are gonna people. Sean Souls, did the Wood Elves ever have interactions with the Spider God? Not in the, like we said, the writings that we have are very scant. I am going to talk about another race that actually does talk about something very close to the Spider God, but the Wood Elves you would actually expect within universe to be maybe faintly aware of something along those lines because of what Athel-Loren kind of entails.
Yeah, I think that if we were looking at the lore as one complete whole, rather than lots of discrete islands, which is how the lore is often created. So the lore for the Wood Elves is created with only one thing in mind. What are the Wood Elves? And they're not necessarily answering all the questions of what do the Wood Elves think about these other things that happen to be around the Warhammer world. And in this case, the close relation between forest goblins and Wood Elves cannot be denied. And that is that there are elves. Let's just move past Wood Elves. There are elves that work very closely with forests. They live in them. They inhabit them, they work with the spirits that are there, and those spirits are often ancient in a way that makes the elves look like a very young species. And then we consider the Arachnarok spiders and the fact that they are terrifying and they are out there. Would the elves have met them? Yes. Would they have done what they can to avoid them? Almost certainly yes. Now, here's the big one, and I think one that is super interesting. Would they have done what would elves do, or elves in general? And that is appease the spirits of the forest. Many elves make sacrifices to the forest. They give blood offerings. They do a variety of different things to ensure that the spirits, which are notoriously, let's say, febrile in nature, they're mercurial. They are often not good, but they can be appeased. Would they have appeased the Arachnarok like that? The answer is yes. They certainly would have. So this one is fascinating because the answer is, for most wood elves, they would have been aware of Arachnaroks, they probably would have appeased them, and if they found out it was connected to another god, that is when we have what is almost certainly the outcome, because we know that they don't have a spider-worshipping sect, which means that it's not an elven god, which also means that they don't have spider riders. They do not like this entity that is out there. They have chosen to shun it and move it away. Do we have stories of Arachnaroks spreading all the way through Athaloran? Do we have stories of them coming out in Arachnaroks with elves riding on their backs? No, and we should. We absolutely should, because they're a part of the Warhammer world. Elves merge with the local nature and pretty much work with it hand in hand. You name a big creature, there is an elf riding it somewhere, because elves are like that. But not spiders. They have been pretty much kicked out of Spiderland forever. So that means that they're probably not compatible, which means that we can now say, I would argue definitively, because they're not mentioned inside the Wood Elf army list, that the spider god is a god. Is not just some sort of spidery thing, because if they weren't, the elves would have dominated the Arachnaroks, because the Arachnaroks, we know, travel from across the old world to one place, which means sometimes they'll have attempted to move around or through Athaloran. So even if they weren't locally there, they are passing by, and the elves have not dominated them, which means we have a bad god.
Yeah.
Bad god.
So, an interesting concept that gets brought up in the Orion trilogy that unfortunately kind of gets just brought up and dropped because it's a Black Library book, but I think actually has a really strong concept behind it, is that there is a group of etheric entities that are spirits of the forest known as the Council of Beasts. And they are basically a group of gods that represent various creatures within the forest, etheric attuned creatures. And they're an interesting bunch. They're not good or bad. They're kind of they have their own objectives. Yeah, they're animals. But what's interesting is the spider is not represented among them. Granted, it's not like pointed out in the book, but you could tell an interesting story there of like, what if there's an ancient tale of maybe the spider god used to be among the Council of Beasts, but got kicked out or left or something happened, which could make for a really interesting, fun story.
So, Sean, even though that was a very simple question, I would argue it's probably one of the best ones for our overall understanding of what the spider god is, because the wood elves of all species, well, of all races in this particular case, that particular race of elves would be the ones that would have dominated the surround, because they dominate every animal they meet. It's just what elves do, but they haven't. And because they haven't, that means that they've got supernatural support, which means that we can say for pretty much certain that if we look at the background as a whole, the forest goblins are in contact with a god.
Yep. It's pronounced. Thank you. It's so helpful when someone types out the exact word. Thank you, CB4N. Wait, is all that Benadryl I took 45 minutes ago why Andy has that fetching beanie on? Yes. What do you mean? It's just me. It's been a solo podcast. There's no who's Andy. Sick. In my campaign, the forest goblin shamans make a much slurry of hallucinogenic mushrooms and tree saps. Then they get intentionally bit by a deadly spider. The result allows them to talk to the spider god. Thoughts? I mean, that's
sure.
Essentially, that's what they do. You just kind of added a bonus step. That's totally fine.
Yeah. What I would generally say, Sig, is that broadly, there is no universal answer to this, because you tend to find that inside the army books, they just write one version because that makes it nice and simple to try and describe the core situation to everyone. But when you actually get down into the specifics of individual tribes, each tribe, each shaman will be doing it differently. Will some of them be cutting themselves up? Yes. Will some of them be imbibing it through their noses? Probably. Will some of them be shoving it up their bum? Very likely. Will some of them be putting spiders in the worst place you can imagine? Yes. Will some of them be mixing spiders with mushrooms and who knows what the hell else? Oh, yeah. Yeah, you name it. A goblin's probably tried it. So, yes, I think it's great.
Yep. Nagash, the Undying King. It's a bit funny to me how there are spiders that adopt frogs to protect their eggs from insects and such, and the Arachnarok pretty much did the same thing with goblins. Yes, I don't think we knew that at the time because that behavior wasn't observed until fairly recently, I believe. But yeah, that's exactly what the Arachnarok did with the goblins, which opens up makes it more plausible in a really fun way. And B is also an adorable mental image while also kind of horrifying because spiders that large.
It's for me, I think, arguably one of the best cases for determining what sort of god this is and what sort of creatures the Arachnarok is. And ultimately, it seems to me that the Arachnarok is doing what big creatures do in the real world. There's all manner of symbiotic relationships between what would be a really scary creature, like say a crocodile, and a not so scary creature, a tiny little bird that cleans out his teeth. There are all manner of relationships like this that this spider, this gigantic spider, has replicated with the goblins. That being the case, we immediately have another case for what sort of deity this would be representing. That is an animal deity.
Yeah, one of the things that's actually really interesting to go along with this to consider is that I don't think they did it intentionally, but Games Workshop actually does a really good job of this is kind of how the forest goblins operate. Compared to most other greenskins, they don't go out on big wars. They don't tend to lead these massive campaigns out to attack everyone unless it's in defense. One of the things that's really noted is like there was a really, really big war right when Karl Franz took the throne. Where he had to deal, like one of the first things he had to deal with as emperor was a big old forest goblin attack that was threatening Reichland. But the reason it went off wasn't because the forest goblins were just like, oh, it's time for a war. It was because the people that were like moving into the Drakewald got too close to the Black Pit. They started moving in on what the forest goblins considered their sacred territory because it's the homes and the hunting grounds of the Arachnaroks. And humans were cutting down the trees and moving into these spaces, so the goblins reacted like somebody basically kicked a hornet's nest, which is very unique behavior for greenskins, in that they are more of a defensive force as opposed to an offensive force, like literally every other kind of greenskin. Jonathan Scott, we answered that.
Yeah,
so
we did.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Phil, don't forget about Twitch cheers. We're not. Andy's been kind enough to star those, so we're getting those.
I've caught them all. I've been trying to watch them as we go.
If not, I'll be sure to double check every once in a while. Elementary Exposure, is Sigmar the 11th or 2nd Primarch? JK, thank you for the streams. I think he'd be a little small to be a Primarch, honestly. They seem like they're large lads. He's also a little, I think, too well-rounded personality-wise.
Right. I'm going to tackle this. I'm going to tackle this like it's a serious question. So the answer to this is, according to some writers in the past, yes, but quite clearly no. The 11th and 2nd Primarch are written to be unanswered. They are never going to be defined. There are writers who will die before they ever allow anything to be pinned down for those particular characters. I've spoken to several of them, and they will repeatedly say the same thing. They are there for a reason, and that is to be unanswered. But there are those who said that Sigmar could have been, and they try to make it work. It doesn't. Loosely speaking, the best argument you can make is that approximately 10,000 years ago, if you went by Warhammer and 40k being in the same place, Slaanesh was born and it all went tits up. The cataclysm occurred in the Warhammer world. It sort of lines up, right? It sort of makes sense. You could almost make it work. And that maybe 8,000 years later, because of the very nature of that, the warp being a place where time doesn't really exist, Sigmar gets spat out by a twin-tail comet and lands. That would be the answer that they would say is the case. It's bullshit if you look at any of the lore. The lore is exceedingly clear about Sigmar being born, about who his parents were, about him growing up, about all the rest of it. It's all there, but you could easily pull a Superman story if you want and pull, oh yes, but they were just Ma and Pa Kent, weren't they? They were just claiming it was their kid. Really want to, you really could do it, and you could make it line up. So the answer is 100% he could be, if that is what tickles your whiskers. But it absolutely absolutely isn't the case if we look at it as an overall setting. But there is more than one writer in the past who not only believed that was the case, but were actually purposefully writing as if that could be the case.
Ricky Chapman, can any other race make contact with the spider god using the spider venom? So
good luck.
I will make a note that there have been rules for different games adapted for the purple skullback spider. And in the most recent iteration, 4th edition, it quite literally has a rule where if you are not a forest goblin shaman and you try and let it bite you and have a vision, you will, but you will literally gain a corruption point because all you're going to see are horrifying nightmare visions. Because you have to think that the goblins really worked up to this over the course of likely centuries and seem to have kind of earned the attention and the favor of the spider god. But remember, they literally see demons. And they're not like fake demons. They appear to be very real etheric entity
terrifying
demons.
Entities.
So
spider
if you
demons.
let one of these spiders bite you and you survive the venom, because it could very easily kill you, then you would literally see demons. And probably have no preparation for it because you didn't realize that was going to happen. And it would be bad.
Yeah, I'd have probably written it far worse if I'd been writing that 4th article. Corruption points, fuck all.
Yeah, it would be not good for your mental health. Assuming the spider doesn't devour your soul because you're in its territory.
It should be fate point time.
Yeah. Zar94, love your work. If the spider god decided to send scouts to spy on the enemy, would they be called spiders?
Spiders. Like spiders. Sure.
Yes. Yep, sure.
Yeah.
Why not? Bill, I didn't ask this during the Ground of the Pod stream, but why are gobos scared of elves anyway? That's actually kind of a funny question. Because it's been kept throughout all the editions. But the reasons became more jokey and less explained as you get later and later, where in 8th edition the only justification they give is that goblins think elves smell funny.
Yep.
And that's literally all it says, and it's just like, all right, bye.
Okay, the real reason, Token.
Yeah, I'll let him actually tell you.
The real reason is Token. They just went, hey, that's what goblins are like there. We're just going to steal it over and say that Token's goblins are sort of, and we're going to say that ours are sort of afraid of elves. Job done. And then they tried to justify it in lore in a variety of ways. For example, in 4th edition, they very clearly stated right at the very beginning, the goblins get their asses handed to them by the perfect elves and had done in the past during previous wars. And when Grom the Paunch tries to drive him towards the elves, it's arguably his hubris that brings him to an end. Grom the Paunch should never have forced the goblins against the high elves. He was always going to lose that battle in the end. At least that was the general feeling of it. But as the editions pass by, as has been made very clear, it has nothing more than they smell to something.
I will say, if you want to play it seriously, I think the best thing that you could argue that makes for good storytelling is that goblins by nature like to fight when they have advantages because they're hiding and it's an ambush or overwhelming numbers. And you can very easily and realistically, for the lore perspective, argue that elves are kind of perfectly designed to counter almost every goblin advantage. Goblins cannot hide from elves in the vast majority of circumstances. Elves have insane vision, insane hearing, and often can see in the dark. And so goblins are dealing with creatures that almost come off as godlike to them because they can't hide from them. And even when they do gang up on them or attack them from behind, the elf A knows they're there and B can slaughter about 50 of them by itself. So over generations, they're like, yeah, no, don't mess with the pointy ears. They're fucking terrifying. Whereas
now,
orcs are like, I want to fight.
As passed on information, that seems to be fine. Although for me, it's quite clear that if we're viewing Warhammer goblins and elves, and we are saying that the rules are a representation of their internal psyches, that means that if you had yourself some random tribe of goblins that had never seen an elf before, they would not be afraid of them because they simply wouldn't know. But they are. And they are. They just are. Yeah. All goblins are. Hey, and that being the case, then now we're looking back towards spores, and it's literally written into their genes, which tells, I think, a really interesting story that's yet to be told.
Yeah, you can have a lot of fun with it. Or hilariously, I don't know, maybe there's Goblin Primary School where the shaman does little visions and goes, if you see pointy ears, run away.
Run.
Morning to Crescent, it's just commie. I don't know
Oh
what
yeah,
that's
yeah,
reference to.
yeah. No, that's in reference to the various spirits of the mountains, the spirits of the
Yeah.
rivers. Are they just kami? Some of them, effectively, yes, are kami, and that's one of the reasons why. Because obviously, I've been building a version of Nippon with Sage just now, and that's where the kami come from Japan. And they, as deities, are 100% supported inside the existing lore, but they are not supported by the standard vision of emotion being the core component of what creates an entity over inside the aether. So you are correct; they are effectively kami. But in speaking to the overall, where is the genesis of the gods? It makes you realize that the core emotional standpoint, as Sotek said, can't be the starting point. That has to be one component of underneath a larger umbrella of things that cause the formation of an etheric entity.
Yep. Ascending Overlord, does Ostankia commanding giant spiders imply a connection, perhaps? So Ostankia is you could argue, yes, very much. Ostankia seems to have a lot of power over just the things that are in her woods, but Ostankia herself is very heavily implied not to be human.
Yeah.
And is an etheric entity just masquerading in human form, which could mean that there is and she, to be fair, she is a much darker entity, and dabbles with things that some might consider, not okay. I think there's an interesting idea there.
Yeah, I think there's really is. And I think if we're running down the what is the spider god, and the answer is it's a god of spiders. Now that's really stupid, but I think may actually be one of the better answers we're going to come up with as we make our way through this, in that it is a natural entity that is a god of spiders, for want of a better description, and it's terrifying because it is at its heart, not something that you can easily treat with. It's an animal, and animals react. Ostankia is quite clearly someone that is dealing with spirits of the wood, spirits of animals, spirits of the land. And Ostankia as an entity would be dealing with something like that. So I think, is there a connection? Possibly, yeah. And I think that could make for a pretty good story. But equally, the ones that she's not dealing with gigantic Ragnarok, she's dealing with the standard giant
spiders. That's true.
Okay, and those sorts of spiders are easily manipulated by a variety of magic. All manner of shamans that are using the Amberwind can also manipulate spiders in a variety of ways. The Ragnarok, though, is beyond them under normal circumstances. You'd almost be requiring something quite, an insight into the background of the room. Oh, I feel like the curtain has been drawn back.
I'm looking for a particular book. I'm having a
actually hilarious
time finding it.
So you could argue that the Ragnarok is where we'd really want to be seeing her manipulating to say she's tied to it specifically. So I would say you could argue a tie, and I think you could make a good argument for it, but I would further say we've got no evidence that there's a tie, and that my preference would be to say there probably isn't one, because the spider god itself is quite clearly marked as really quite a powerful entity that she might not want to get too close to anyway, because hey, it's an animal, and animals are unpredictable. We all know what wild animals are like. It's a wild animal.
Yeah, and I think that would be the important thing to look out for, is not just spiders or giant spiders, but Ragnarok spiders, which the forest goblins themselves consider to be deific entities, and seem to have a much more intrinsic, deep relationship with the spider god itself, as opposed to just regular giant spiders.
You could argue that. Oh, sorry, go.
I will say that one of the fun things about what Andy talked about earlier with the relationship between like the Azrai or the wood elves or elves in general and the spiders that Total War kind of introduced, that Total War doesn't take it super far, but you could play around with really fun, is that very uniquely in Total War, Drycha, who of course despises the elves more than anything and hates them, does have access to spider units.
And I think that makes sense.
All the elves don't.
Yeah, I really like that.
Make a lot of sense.
Yeah, it really does. I forgot what I was going to say for my last point. It doesn't matter. Move on.
Okay, it'll come back to you, I'm sure.
It'll come back to me, I'm sure.
Watchdog, sort of off topic, but if you're placed in the old world, what do you think your racing career would be? I would throw myself off a building pretty quick, to be honest, because it would be horrible to be there. But I mean, I'd probably just be a guy. I don't know. I don't think I'd be that interesting.
I mean, of all the species that are out there, you your first inclination is, elf looks like it's the best, doesn't it? Until you consider what happens to an elf when it dies. And then you're like, oh no, wait a minute. Being an elf is actually the worst. So maybe one of the dragon kids. Oh no, because then I'd have to work for, one of the kids of one of the dragon kids. But then I'd have to work for one of the 9. Yeah, no, that sounds awful.
Maybe being like a dwarf lore master. That could be like a decent mix of like, I'll have a decently long life and live somewhere vaguely
safe. Oh.
But I'm definitely gonna die. But there's like
at least if you're a dwarf, afterlife. You're less likely to be a mutant scum within about a month of wandering around.
Yeah, so I'd probably go dwarf lore master. Be a book nerd among the Dawi. Jonathan Scott, if only someone had a Wolfram campaign where they could introduce spider cultists to add some much needed internal division for the Wood Elves.
Well, if only they did.
If only. Indeed. We'll never know.
I just released the most recent episode up, actually, to the patrons, because it goes live to everyone else on Monday. And the very, 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 very end of that is not so much a setup for what you just said, but is certainly potentially an influencer on what's going to happen over there.
Exactly how intelligent are the giant spiders? The actual giant spiders are not very. There are like occasional species that are noted as being surprisingly clever. I think it's like the Drakewald man catchers are noted for being particularly nasty, but it's more like just like, animals performing animal functions that are surprisingly dexterous and stuff like that. The Arachnaroks, though, are very often shown to be capable of just flat out thinking. Like they think, like they look at things and they think for a while, and then they make decisions and they react very carefully to certain kinds of like goblins talking to them and stuff. And there seems to be, they seem to be genuinely some form of intelligent. How much is never really stated because they always are displayed as very alien. Like their concept of thinking is so foreign to anything we would understand that measuring their intelligence would be very difficult. But they're definitely not just animals.
Yeah, agreed. So I'm not necessarily saying they're not just animals, because cats, dogs, they can appear to be thinking. True. They can appear to be doing stuff, and they can be domesticated. And it's worth noting that the giant spiders have been domesticated. Now, the nature of domestication that Forest goblins provide is not necessarily what we would like to refer to as domestication, but they have been domesticated. They are the pets, for want of a better description, of the forest goblins. And they have been brought under control. They respond to their training. They are ridden. They are guidable. They are 100% animals that have been brought underneath their control. They are not persuaded. They are generally forced into this particular position because goblins are not the kindest of masters, as we all know. But they are very good at their jobs. So are they clever enough to be trained? Yes. Are they clever enough to put up a concerted fight and to band together to stop the goblins? No. So they're not as clever as goblins. Job 1. The Arachnaroks completely outwit the goblins because they're bigger and stronger, not because they're cleverer. In the end, the goblins win that fight and end up being their helper monkeys. So the gigantic ones, the Arachnaroks, you could argue have intelligence. And I think you could argue have an alien intelligence, because that's generally how it's perceived, but you could also argue just have an animal intelligence, in that they're as dangerous as, say, a crocodile that's just sitting there waiting for a prey to come along. The little tiny goblins come over and they help it out, and they're like, there's nothing for me to eat here. I'm waiting for the buffalo or the bison to pass by. And then it comes running out and takes a grab of the leg, pulls it into the water and barrel rolls. And all the goblins sitting on the edge going, holy shit, please don't kill me too. And that seems to be a relatively animalistic way of dealing with it. I think alien to us, as in we are sentient creatures, might be a better way of viewing it than saying alien to animals. You could argue that they're just animals. Yes. And I think you would be 100% within the correct ballpark. But then I'm going to take it one step further and say they're probably not. And the reason I'm saying they're probably not is because Warhammer writers are involved with it, which means that every single Warhammer writer will go, well, how can I make this cooler and better? Because they can't help themselves. And the next Warhammer writer will come along and say, they're actually insanely intelligent, the best thing that ever happened ever, and they'll take over the world. They're coming out of your toilet.
Why isn't this dial at 12? Twist it.
twist. They're coming out of your toilets. They're coming out of your baths. Oh, Arachnaroks are awful. They've got long, spindly legs that can get anywhere. Watch out. Cover your buttocks, because they're coming for you, my son. And it's going to be awful. So the answer to that is they'll be exactly as intelligent as is required for the story at hand. And sometimes that will be a ridiculous intelligence. But as it stands, all evidence suggests that they're animals and that there is a powerful deity behind them. And to make my last point that I forgot earlier, just to give a nice analogy for everyone to see that goblins being helper monkeys to the good old giant spiders is not an uncommon affair. Take a look at how the Noblars and the ogres work. It's exactly the same relationship. There is no difference. Exactly the same. This is a goblin way of dealing with things.
Phil, the forest goblins keep saving the Empire in their time of need. Where's their Runefang Calfrons? Maybe they should nick one from those lazy electigets. Gork knows they deserve it more. I mean, obviously you're joking while also pointing out a real thing that the forest goblins are genuinely one of the greatest defenders of the Empire. In that when the forces of chaos invade, they often go through the forests where the forest goblins are. The beastmen are constantly fighting the forest goblins. And like there are some Empire scholars who posit the idea that the Empire would be in a significantly worse state if it weren't for the fact that the forest goblins are around. And some argue that we should probably not antagonize them and we should just let them have their spaces, to which some of the more capitalistic and greedy ones go, no, we can expand, chop down those trees, get the resources. And, it leads to the forest goblins.
War.
Yeah, which turns into war. There is a very weirdly, the forest goblins are probably not intentionally, just by like using your observation skills, if you are a human, the easiest green-skinned faction to have diplomacy with, and that just leave them alone, and they'll most of the time leave you alone. But of course, humans be humans, and humans don't play that way.
And plus, these forest goblins need to get food for their gods, which means that they are going to be coming out and attacking the villages and the towns and similar, because they need the blood sacks to throw down into the pits of the Arachnaroks.
Yeah, but it's like, it'd be easy, relatively, to turn them against the Beastmen.
Beastmen,
because the Beastmen are always going to be there.
100%.
And stuff like that. There's like very strong evidence. I mean, think about Tamarkand. Tamarkand's invasion almost got wiped out by a fucking goblin ambush, of which the forest goblins notably participated in, because there are certain kinds of forest goblin tribes that live up in the mountains with their big mountain spiders. So like, they're kind of a almost immune system response of the old world at times. Colby Carrion, is there a spider race or insect races, and would they be connected to the spider god or pantheon of the insect gods? I imagine Napalm would have one or two spider folk. So, have you ever heard, if you're familiar with my channel, I did a Halloween series like 4 or 5 years back, where almost every day for October I did a different creature. There is a very rare but really fucking gross creature that got brought up in 2nd edition in like one of the big monster manuals, and it's called the Silken. And Silkens, if you were to see one, they basically look like imagine like a centaur spider, where it's kind of got the upper body of a humanoid and the lower body of a spider, but they're small. They're only like, I think like somewhere between 2 and 4 feet tall, but their webs are so strong and so sticky that if you run into it, whatever is attached to that web is never getting away. Like if your skin gets on it, you will need to literally rip your flesh off to get off their webs, because it's that strong. And they like to catch people and eat them, and their poison, their venom is very nasty, and they are genuinely nightmarish creatures. But it's a very, like, they give you their profile and like little bits about them, but it doesn't talk at all about like for them from their perspective or anything like that. Could they worship the spider god? Very possibly.
Yeah,
I wouldn't put past them.
In the Warhammer world, there is literally everything that you can imagine somewhere. And I know that is a terrible answer to any question of, is there one of these? But you find that every time that somebody like myself comes along and says, no, they've never been mentioned anywhere, Warhammer will then have a book release a month later that has an entire set of, I don't know, butterfly men.
The GW writer that watches the show goes,
well, screw you. Exactly. So out come the butterfly men of Can Shawnee, or whatever they decide to call it. Probably called flutterbuys, or whatever the hell they're called. And everyone's like, well, here come the flutterbuys. Okay, who'd have guessed it? So the answer is that the Warhammer world is enormous and has space for almost everything, and indeed almost certainly has elephant-headed men or insect butterfly folk up in a mountain somewhere. They're going to exist. Now, where they're most likely not to exist is in the areas where Games Workshop has already written most of what they're going to write in terms of the core lore, and that's somewhere like the Empire, Britonia, and similar. These places have already been very well defined, but the Warhammer world as a whole has been so poorly defined that there's vast swathes of it that even games like Total War tried to come along and say, can we do this? They're like, yeah, we haven't done that yet. And this is a world that's been going for freaking ever. There's no reason this could never all be just pinned down. Literally within 2 or 3 weeks, with a couple of writers down with Games Workshop's headquarters, they write themselves a world Bible. The whole thing's sorted, fixed forever. But no, the goals are purposely left open so that they can always add more later if they wish to do so. As various trends come and go, you tend to find Warhammer picks up on them. For a good time, for example, cold ones look just like Godzilla. And there was a reason, because Godzilla was popular at the time. They were not the best Cold One models, trust me. But they existed for some time. And that's loosely what the answer to this question is. And the answer is always kind of yes, with an answer of, in this case, not a lot that's been specifically laid out by the lore, but I do agree that they could be linked in one way or another.
Yeah. As far as Pantheon of Insect Gods, I don't know of any insect gods off the top of my head other than a spider god. There is like a weird race of ant people that shows up in a Gotrek and Felix book. Which is horrifying. It's a creature known as the Sleeper, and they're implied to have kind of their own pantheon before they fall to chaos. But you can certainly add them on your own, and they would fit in just fine. Now, I will say, Nippon, considering like how famous of a concept Origumo are, yeah, that would be missed. That would be sad if there was not some kind of spider demon creature running around. Charles CK, Andy has said on tabletop, one Empire model is worth 15 guys in the fiction. Does that about that 1 to 15 ratio apply to all factions, or do some differ?
Okay, so it's not even 1 to 15 as a standard. That's just what some books have suggested. At the back, I think it was Warmaster. They give a couple of figures there as well. In one case, it's 1 to 10. In another book, they say it's always 1 to 5. The answer is to this one that yes, it applies equally across the lot. You tend to find that that's why some regiments, like they say, the Skaven Slaves, were generally much bigger, also much cheaper in points. Having said that, though, when you actually see something like a Skaven Slave regiment that's actually getting deployed in one of the novels, they'll often be in thousands, literal thousands, not 40 models or whatever might come down. Even 40 only comes out about 400. So the answer is that it's not an exact science. It's nothing more than a general indication that Warhammer, or Old World as a game, is dealing with much, much, much smaller formations, but they're moving around the battlefield like they're big formations. So they're wheeling around the battlefields as they're moving from place to place. Where if this was really only about 15 guys running as a group, they would not be having the same formation movements that Warhammer rules suggest that they have. That only happens when you're moving in big blocks of troops. So broadly, yes, it applies equally, but you tend to find that it is at best a loose metric.
Does today's subject imply there was once a god for Zotes, Western Dragons, Dragon Ogres, Thunder Losers, and other gigantic dangerous speeds? You joke, but could be in some of those cases. Could the Dragon Ogres have once had their own god? Yeah, sure. Zotes, absolutely. Western Dragons, a lot of them are very intelligent. Why not?
I think that there's probably an answer to this, and it's much more fundamental than this stream can possibly pin down within a few pithy comments. So I'm simply going to give an answer which is loosely. We know when the gods pop up for the first time ever. We have that written quite clearly into the rule in multiple places, and it's with the advent of the old ones. The old ones arrive, and gods start popping up all over the place. That is interesting, super fascinating. And these gods start communicating with people, sometimes independently, sometimes on purpose. The elves have their gods popping along saying, hey, we created you. Look at us. We're great. We've got chaos gods that start talking to the dragon ogres. Hey, dragon ogres, things are bad for you. Look what's happening with these days. Look at these. Why don't you help us out? We're chaos gods. We rock. Yeah, man. So there is gods popping up generally post the old ones. They're not really mentioned, which would, to a degree, answer your question. Western dragons? Nope. Dragons pre-existed them. Dragon ogres? Nope. They pre-existed them. Indeed, anything that pre-exists the old ones probably don't have gods. And the only people that we have that are openly discussing the gods that come from this era say this: hey, gods, yeah, that's a new concept. We predate it. And there we go with the good old gods from Cathay. Oh, sorry, the dragons, who are looking in going,
ridiculous.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. So I would broadly suggest that the answer to most of this is no.
Yep.
But that there are a host of gods that have come after for a variety of things.
Yeah, Zodes in particular would be super fascinating because they're in their last bits of lore they got in 8th edition, which was a big update for them. They're flat out stated to be an old one creation that are very similar to the Lizardmen, but they also work with the elves, so they could have a fascinating relationship with pantheons and deities.
Yeah, definitely.
Mad Hat Films. Hey, I know this is off topic, Andy, but I'm a wild American. Edinburgh. Is there a place you'd recommend checking out here? I'm here for 3 days.
Oh, wow. Okay, 3 days. That's obviously slightly off topic, but hey, I'll answer anyway. If you're coming to Edinburgh, there's a few things I definitely suggest looking, particularly if you're doing the tourist thing. Number one is pop up to the top of the Royal Mile and see the castle. You can't go wrong with seeing the castle. You're going to see it no matter what you do when you come to Edinburgh, because it's going to be sitting in the centre of town. You're not going to be able
That's
to.
That's very true.
But do pop up. True. Have a little wander around. It doesn't cost very much. It's not that exciting, but it gives you a nice in-depth look into what it's like to be in Edinburgh. It's worth having a look at Arthur's Seat down at the bottom because it's basically a park living in the centre of Edinburgh. Anything else I generally say worth going to see? Anyone out there in the chat from Edinburgh that gives them any suggestions? Check the chat. That would be my last one because it's almost certainly
he's in YouTube chat for anyone that wants to.
Yeah, so do drop into YouTube and throw some ideas over at Mad Hat Films because there are a host of really nice places. Most of the ones I'm thinking of are sitting in the very centre of the city. Edinburgh Dungeon's quite fun if you want to get some creepy facts about what Edinburgh used to be. I've got one. Mary King's Close. That allows you to go down into under Edinburgh. Think of that a little bit like the Skaven version of Edinburgh, where you can go down and you realise that Edinburgh wasn't just one layer, the street layer. There's about 10 layers beneath that and 10 layers above. Basically, back in the 1600s, it was a 20-story building. And that is, in many respects, what Middenheim is. So do take a check at that, and it'll give you a good idea what Middenheim is like to live on that giant rock. That's a good
beautiful city. I want to go back very bad.
Yeah, you'd be very welcome. Come and say hi.
Yeah, Hammond, for Watchdog, a lazy Estalian / Talayan banker. Hammond, you make way too many references. I don't know what the fuck you're talking about, dude.
I've lost that one, damn it.
A Wa starts when greenskins become numerous enough, so during the symbiosis with the spiders, maybe the spiders are actually still eating enough goblins to prevent them from starting a Wa. And in that case, they stop the start of Wa. That's a fascinating idea.
The Blam, damn you slightly.
Damn you slightly, indeed.
No,
that's
just
a
slightly.
Really interesting idea.
I was going to say damn you slightly because I actually wanted to say this as part of my next section.
I got
but that's one of the great things about the super chats and them coming in because they often bring up stuff that we don't necessarily think ourselves. And I think it's one of the great joys of our streams. But this one in particular, there must be a reason that we don't have enormous forest goblin was spilling out from the forests. Now, they do occasionally occur, as in we get a lot of forest goblins coming out to do a raid and drag all the corpses back to their spider god, but they're not big and they're not frequent. And it does suggest that that's because the forest goblins themselves are probably culled more than the others. And we know night goblins tend to build, fill where they are, then spill out. And I would suggest that possibly to Blam, you are 100% onto something. I think that is a great idea.
Yeah, and leaning into the analogy earlier of like the goblins kind of being adopted like the spiders and the frogs relationship, of that there's this symbiotic relationship, but you have, man, that opens up a lot of interesting things of like if the spiders are doing it without realizing, or if the spider god understands the nature of the greenskins and the spider god knows it needs to keep, it's healthier for that symbiotic relationship for the goblins to remain at a certain population level. That's a really interesting idea that I think is heavily supported, actually.
I like it a lot.
Synod Overlord, with greenskins being spores, could the spiders have been affected in reverse to the goblins taking venom? So could it have had some effect on the spiders around them?
Okay, so physiology is a strange thing. People react to things differently. One of the things that I've used as a constant theme in some of my work with orcs and goblins is that they are not just dangerous because they are freaking psychos that will murder everything that passes them, but they are also, by their very nature, prone to causing infections in other people because they're filled with, effectively, stuff that can cause infections because of spores and similar. So do I think that this is something that could occur? Yes. Do I think that it's something that has occurred. And I think the chances of spores taking over spiders is real. This happens in the real world. Take a look at cordyceps. Take a look at cordyceps. Take a look at what is basically the source fungus for The Last of Us. If you've watched The Last of Us show or played The Last of Us game, where they basically turn the spiders into spider zombies. And I quite like that idea. In fact, I don't just like it. I think it is a core concept the Games Workshop has yet to grab onto. But I think at some point, the idea of tiered, mushroomed spiders coming out of the forest is almost certainly going to become a thing as they realize that they've got their fungus side of things with their goblins, and they've got their spider side of things with their spiders, and bringing in the fungus to the spiders just makes sense. So will it occur at some point? I think likely. Now, the big question is, does that mean that they are controlled? And I would argue in some cases it would be super fun if they were, because you could make some good fun stories. But I think in general, the spider god, definitely not. And the Arachnaroks seems unlikely.
I see. Watchdog asked this question, and then Hammond responded via super chat for Watchdog.
For
person Watchdog.
If you'd done an at, I'd have got it.
A laziest Stalin or delaying banker of what would you want to be in the old world? I see. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Banker, nice.
But yeah, the whole I think especially if you're leaning into the whole concept of that symbiotic relationship, the fact that like the spores would start to have some kind of effect on the spiders that works, that A is good for the greenskins, but also maybe good for the spiders in unusual ways. There's a lot of really cool strength there. You could also make some crazy looking models out of that if you went really hard with it. Dr. Awesome. Hey, from 2:30 a.m. in Australia. Thanks for making me fall more in love with the Warhammer Fantasy world and wanting to do my own lore stuff. Also couldn't not cheer on the spider episode from Spiderland. Yeah, I don't know how y'all fucking do it. I see orb weavers and I'm just like, nope.
Let's burn the whole country down. It's okay. The gods are already doing that. Holy crap.
Sarmillion Bloodweaver. What are the differences between Black Pit and Mount Arachnos? I'm glad you asked, because I'm going to talk about that real quick for a second. I meant to talk about it earlier and I forgot. So
I'm actually interested in this one because Mount Arachnos has been given pretty much zero lore in the books. Has there been more added to it?
Yeah, so Mount Arachnos, a lot of people don't know about the lore written about it because it's not where you think it would be written.
Where's the hiding?
It's written in a very unusual place, which is that Mount Arachnos plays a very key note in, drumroll, the Tomb King's 8th edition army book.
God damn it, how did I miss that?
So, Mount Arachnos is talked about in that book because it is a major threat to Nehekara, because they know that there are giant spiders that live there. And there was one particular incident where Mount Arachnos, quote unquote, erupted, and out of it came spiders that were so colossal, the Tomb Kings could not stop them. And one of the Tomb King cities, I think it may have been Qatar, basically starts falling to this horde of spiders ridden by goblins. So they are a forest goblin horde that live inside Mount Arachnos. And the spiders that come out are so massive that even the greatest of the Tomb King constructs can't stop them. The only time they're finally turned back is when Grand Hierophant Kontep makes an appearance, like a goddamn superhero, and he summons such a massive sandstorm that it forces the Arachnaroks back up into the mountains. And he saves the day, and then he runs away before anyone can identify him because Cetra told him if he came back to Nehekara, he'd be killed. So he has to leave before anybody notices who he is. But Total War then took this concept and ran with it. They also went back and delved into some old fucking lore, which that there's an old White Dwarf article that talks about different species of goblins, which many people would be like, oh, that's not canon anymore. But Total War went and said, we're going to make it canon.
Whatever.
And make it fun, which is that there were two kinds of greenskins introduced in that book, which are the Boglars, which they made into marsh-dwelling Noblars, and then the Fire Kobolds, which are just goblins that live in like lava environments, volcanoes and stuff like that. So Total War ran with it and said, what if we made fucking lava spiders? Which is why you have the Lava Arachnarok and the Lava Spider Riders, which are horrifying flame spiders that come out of Mount Arachnos. That's where they originate from and for the game. And they even
Love it.
went so far as to make it where the fire Ragnarok, or the lava Ragnarok, has a unique ability where it vibrates its abdomen and starts spewing lava at everything around it, which almost works as like a pre-digestion, which works surprisingly well. Where it's like, oh, instead of webs, they sling this hot, horrible, what's the word I'm looking for? A word adjacent to lava, but not lava.
Magma?
Magma. Yeah, they sling magma at you to melt you down so they could slurp up your good juices. It works, and it's horrifying. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe it's not actually magma. It's just a digestive enzyme that looks like magma.
Yeah, that would work really well, though, wouldn't it? A bit of really hot, reddish digestive enzyme that breaks you down, and then they suck you right back up again. No, yeah. I like that.
But so, as far as the difference between the Black Pen and Mount Arachnos, the Mount Arachnos in the Tomb King book is listed as a sacred valley or a sacred vale to essentially the largest spiders in the world, the greatest monstrous entities that have ever lived in just the Warhammer world, big spiders. The Black Pit is kind of the exact same thing, but it's in the deep, dark depths of the forest. And the Black Pit, according to the Forest Goblins, is known as the Veil of Many Eyes, is a sacred site to where the largest Arachnaroks that the Forest Goblins in the Empire essentially are aware of live. And it's a place that's so dark, no light can get in, because the trees are so old and gnarled and all over each other, and there are webs everywhere. It's called the Black Pit because it's literally black. There's no light. It talks about how so little light gets in that even if you can somehow see, there's like no color. Like color doesn't exist really well there because like the light isn't, reflecting off surfaces to give you the concept of color, which is a horrifying concept. It's almost like the spider god has kind of made the spider god's influence is almost so strong there. It kind of seems to almost reflect his realm of a sense, in that it very strongly suggests that even if you had like a torch or a way to create light, you might not see color.
Yeah, it does say that exactly. I found that it's a very small quotation, but I found it particularly revealing because it suggests that the aether, the realm of the spider god, has begun to bleed through to reality. It's not just that it's dark, it's that it's become monochrome. It's a little bit like in that part in Thor Ragnarok, not Ragnarok, pardon me, the next one, the Thor movie where they go
Love and Thunder.
Love and Thunder, where they arrive in the realm and it's all black and white and there's infinity at the end. And it's a really nice moody shot place, but it's like that, but bloody bleak and dark as well. So even if you were a species that were capable of seeing in the dark, it would still be all in this monochrome black and white. I think that speaks to not just the realm seeping through, but the spider god itself. The spider god itself sees in black and white. It's a lovely metaphor. And I think,
are you prey or are you not?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that speaks to the god as a whole as well. And if you're going to be writing more material for yourself about it, thinking in such simple terms, I think would be a lovely way of continuing on that metaphor. It is a god of black and white. It is a god of extremes. It is a god of pure survival and instinct, much like most animals are. And if anything, that makes it all the more terrifying. It's looking at you and deciding, are you prey or do I just not care? And it's not the best place to be.
It's that especially from a human perspective, if there are a few things scarier to us than coming up against an entity that has literally a binary way of existence.
Yeah.
Where it looks at you and goes, will I eat you or do you not matter? Because if you're not food, you don't matter. With the forest goblins almost seeming to have managed to insert themselves as a blurred line there, which is a very green-skinned thing to do, which is what I love so much about, is that they break the rules of this spider god essentially a little bit. Which is very on brand for greenskins, and I love that.
They make themselves useful.
Wait, Sotek, did you mean a fucking Gobbo ambush or a fucking Gobbo ambush? Are there Slaneshi? No, we're moving on.
Let's move on swiftly. Oh, haven't.
What are the differences between godly entities that stem from animals and those from higher species? We know that Urson and Ulrich came from animals, but then started to pay attention to humans.
Nope.
Nope. But
Nope.
we'll talk about that in a
Nope.
second.
Nope.
Something similar happened with the Spider God. I'm going to let Andy just go off on this.
Right.
I'll
No,
let him take the lead.
I am going to hard nope on that one, Phil. Those gods did not come from animals and then give attention to humans. That is an entirely made up thing. It's not mentioned anywhere. Now, are those gods represented frequently by animals? Yes. Do they have associations with those animals? Absolutely. But do all gods almost have that? Yeah, most do. Almost all of them do, in fact. There was a lovely bit when we were writing Tome of Salvation where at one point we were going to be representing all of the gods purely as animals and just having actual animals representing them, because all of the gods can be represented by animals bar one, pretty much, and that's Sigmar. The entire pantheon, Myrmidia, she's an eagle. Well, that was easy. You can go through them all. Tal, look, he's just a big stag. Okay, here comes Raya. She's a doe. It's really, really simple stuff. These gods are not animals. They're just not. And they never were. These are gods of humanity that have associations with animals because of where they come from and the associations that humans themselves have placed upon it. Now, are you saying that it comes from humans or it came from the gods? That is what's up for debate, loosely. So in this case, I would strongly say that neither Ulrich nor Urson are animal gods. They are human gods. Now, does that mean that they might have come from that originally? Possibly. I'm not negating your post. I'm saying that it is not universally the case. In fact, I'm going to probably argue it definitely never was the case, because animals aren't sentient and these gods are. And their type of sentience is quite clearly different. The spider god is not like the other gods. It quite clearly is different. And that being the case, I mean, the elves refuse it entirely. The elves don't refuse the human gods. They think humans just have it wrong. So on this one, I would say, what are the difference between godly entities that come from animals and those from higher species? They're entirely different types of entities. In the same way that, say, for example, a roving fury or a big, huge demon that sits on the other side that isn't attached to one of the chaos gods is different to one of the demons that's attached to a chaos god. They are very different types of entity. One of them is entirely under the control of one thing, a particular mindset. The other one is very much whatever that entity happens to be. They're just different. In the same way that humans are different to most animals. We are almost the same. Our DNA is almost identical. But in terms of how we appreciate the world, in terms of how we engage, in terms of how we do things, we could not be more different if we tried. We are not dogs. We are not cats. In a similar fashion, those gods are not animals. They're not humans. They're not sentient. They are coming from a different place, and their type of sentience is in turn different. I think is where I would start, but I definitely wouldn't say that Urson is a bear.
Yeah. There's a different, don't confuse the bear god with is a bear. Yeah. There's a difference there. Though it's a subtle one, but it is a big difference.
Totally. It's a subtle one, but it's a difference.
Yeah. And even think of the closest thing outside of the spider god, you might be tempted to say, oh, well, Sotek is a snake god. And even then it's no, he's not a snake that is a god. He is a god that is represented by a snake.
Manifests as a snake, perhaps, but that doesn't make him a snake god.
That's the tricky thing. That being said, I would laugh at the idea that there are not cultures or places in the Warhammer world where you would meet literal gods that are animals, or gods that quite literally represent an animal. Like totemic gods are something well understood in our world.
Yeah.
They don't appear a lot in the Warhammer world as it's currently been explored. But if they are to explore other portions of it, we might see more totemic gods pop up.
I think you'll find as other cultures are explored, this is going to become more of a thing. I think it's almost inevitable.
Yeah, Age of Sigmar already a ton of totemic gods. They're literally called god beasts.
Yeah, and they were already hinted at in many places, in books even that I've written, like the Tome of Salvation, for example. They are sort of hinted at there. But the primary core deities of humanity are very much human gods. They are not gods that are animals. They're gods that represent as animals in certain places. They have sacred animals, might be a better way of putting it. More with the ravens, for example. But that doesn't make more a raven.
Yeah. Oh my God, it's even bigger. All right, lads. Last one, I swear. The Forest Gobos are just the absolute best. Love them to death. While their design can be seen as problematic, I love the rationalization that they're actually using feathers to imitate imperial nobles. There's something very interesting about their green skin and intimidating the status symbols of the people they encounter, as you'd expect from a species with a natural affinity for warfare. One thing I'll say is that I personally became much more comfortable with forest goblins when they stopped wearing feathered headdresses and they instead just put the feathers through their flesh.
Through their flesh, that made all the difference.
Huge change. Huge change.
I mean, the Native American culture does not have a monopoly on feathers. However, it absolutely does have a monopoly on Native American headdresses because that is theirs. And it just is. And if you're copying and pasting it over, you better have a goddamn good reason for doing so. If you're creating your own culture and you've got feathers being a part of it, that's cool. If they're piercing their heads with feathers, that's cool. If they're doing it just to make Native American headdresses, slightly less cool. It depends entirely on how you're presenting it. But a creature with like peacock feathers sticking out and stuck into his head, that's obviously nothing to do with Native Americans. There is a line there which they have danced across, sometimes better or worse.
I do like I have seen it written in some of the more modern lore that I do like that it's like forest goblins see the generals of the empire and the grand masters and the knights, and they've got like these big plumes and these like really big feather things, and the goblins are like, that's the big lad. I want to be a big lad like that. I'm gonna I'm going to steal that concept, but they put it through their flesh, or they do it as trophies. Some of them, I think there's actually a mention that some of those feathers quite literally come from knights or nobles or individuals who have been killed, and the goblins take things from their corpses and wear them as trophies.
Better. Yeah, a clean set of justification would be better than just making headdresses.
Yeah, but it is much better now. It is, like, don't get me wrong, so much better now. Because like you can literally find art of old forest goblins with quite literal it looks like it's out of like a spaghetti western.
It really does.
Anyway, but yes, I do agree that one thing that's really, really fun about greenskins is what they do take and adapt from other cultures that they witness. That is something that's well established through greenskin stuff, is that they will often, if they're heavily impressed by something and they consider it a feature of martial prowess, they will often imitate it to make themselves seem bigger and badder, which is fun. That's good. I like that. Hammond, Watchdog. Oh yeah, we did that. Thank you, Hammond. Phil. Okay, I lied. Another one. If Wa magic is inside the winds of magic, does it really make sense for wizards to unravel their spells and for shamans to do the same to wizards' spells?
Yes.
Yes, I would say yes, it does.
Yeah, they're magic is a part of the existing framework of the Warhammer world. Just because they do it differently doesn't mean it's not magic. It's magic. Yeah, and they are using it and channeling it in a different way, generating it in a different way, but still it's the same component stuff. And you can disrupt it by using the winds of magic in the same way that they can throw their stuff into the winds of magic to disrupt you.
Yeah, if you think of it as like whether you consider Wa energy to just purely be like psychic energy, completely and utterly separate from the winds of magic, which it necessarily isn't. There are interactions between them. Ideally, what you're looking at with magic and with Wa energy is that fundamentally what it does is you're reshaping some aspect of reality for a result. But if you're reshaping reality to, say, create a big godfoot that's going to stomp on your enemy, and your enemy sees that and is able to use his own reality warping powers to dissipate that in some way by blowing it apart with his own form of reality shaping, in this case, the winds of magic, it still accomplishes the effect of stabilizing reality in the sense that that effect does not occur, therefore kind of dispelling it. Would be like a way I would try and explain it. Lord Sarthenius, I made it! Damn, alarm didn't go off. Forgot to change charge my phone after running a Vlad/Malekith campaign with my brother last night. Nice. Vlad and Malekith, that's a spooky team up. I would not want to live in that reality. No, thank you. Because that sounds like you're getting your ass kicked if you're not on their team. Ricky Chapman, a Ragnarok exhibit in the Imperial Zoo. How long do you think till it inevitably breaks out and ends up fighting a Carnosaur Jurassic Park style? Also, who wins? I would argue, news. Yeah. A, bad news. Though B, hypothetically, if you run with the idea of the forest goblins, where by keeping it fed, it just kind of hangs out and sits in its little cave, it might just never come out as long as they keep it well fed. But it also would make for a boring exhibit, which would inevitably lead to someone trying to force it out, which would antagonize it, leading to the Jurassic Park situation. But a Carnosaur
I'm thinking, would
version-
I put an Ragnarok in the zoo? I wouldn't, because I don't think they could get one. But
Yeah, that's fair.
I do think that doing a Jurassic Park pastiche type thing with an Ragnarok could be super cool. As in one noble who's managed to fence off an area of forest. And he's basically captured it in there and thinks that it's never going to get out. And he's got his thing and he's done his thing, and then it breaks out and all carnage breaks loose.
Organizing tours in
Yeah,
your Ragnarok Claire. Yeah, this will be great.
This is perfect.
I've spared no expense. No expense has been spared. Fucking, oh my god, I need a John Hammond Imperial Noble character. That'd be such a fun character.
Proper stupid. I love it.
Yeah. As far as it versus a Carnosaur, that's actually a very fair fight. Carnosaurs and Arachnaroks are monster killers. Both of them, like the Arachnaroks, are quite literally mentioned that their webs are so strong and their venom so potent. There are stories of them webbing down and killing dragons. Which, if you're a dragon killer, you're apex. Which Carnosaurs are also dragon killers in their history. So the two of them fighting, I mean, that's literally a battle of equal titans. It would just depend a lot on, it would just depend a lot on the circumstances of the fight. But I'd say it's anybody's game. Sig, if you were to expand the Forest Goblin roster, what would be your big ideas? For me, at least when it comes to like Total War is all about kind of filling in things that could make sense, but the tabletop game just didn't bother with. I would do Greenskins do not have a monstrous cavalry unit, giving me a whole unit of gigantic spider riders, which for those unaware, there's 3 tiers of spiders in the tabletop game, which there are giant spiders, which are like basic cavalry. Then you have gigantic spiders, which were exclusive to the Goblin Big Boss characters as a mount, and they were monstrous cavalry size, so they were like on a twice as large base. And then there was the Arachnarok, which was fucking huge, and when it came out was a really big deal because no one had ever seen a model that big for fantasy outside of Forge World before.
Proper impressive.
Yeah, it's like on a 100 by 150 millimeter base. It's fucking massive.
Beautiful.
So the gigantic spiders would make for a really cool monstrous cavalry unit because Greenskins just don't have that. And the fact that it would be a goblin unit that has like poison attacks and all sorts of other fun gimmicks would just make it extra spicy and fun.
So for me, it would be first giving the forest goblins clear rules for being forest goblins, which they've never had, so they can pass through forests. Strangely enough,
yeah, give them like
speed.
woodland.
Yeah, they can pass through, and they can also fire through forests. So they can fire through it.
Yeah, they
like
do. They do have those rules in Total War.
Yeah, they don't in Warhammer because Warhammer.
Yeah, they have the woodland rule in Total War.
So they can fire through forest. That would be great. I mean, it's so obvious, but it's a good starter point to make our forest goblins different to goblins and different from night goblins. I'd then be looking at your core cavalries, which are going to be your spiders. I'd probably keep the gigantic spiders for the characters. I give the shamans their own rules, and I give shamans their own magic list. And I'd separate it out from the little wa and give them their very clear own spider rules. I'd get ourselves a bunch of poison wielding troopers. So our basic forest goblins have got like poison champions, and our range shots have got poison arrows. So we get poison rules popping up all over the place. All of our core units would have poison as an additional bonus. I would be looking at doing things that allow the spider nature of their armies to pop up. So we'd be looking at possibly, rather than having a gigantic spider cavalry unit, having gigantic spider units, I think would be quite fun. So having them going forward without riders and having the riders left with just the characters, so that we've got something a bit different. Possibly having ourselves some sort of wrangler equivalent, much like you've got the squig wranglers who are doing their things as they're pushing the squigs forward. You could have something similar there. Then you'd have small swarms of spiders as well, and suddenly we've got ourselves, I think, a pretty broad army.
I mean, hell, if I was approaching from like more of a tabletop or role play perspective, I would probably lean really heavily into different kinds of like giant spider units where like you have like some like leaping spiders, or you have some tunnel spiders.
And then they got the ones that can ambush by coming up out the
ambush
table,
spiders,
trapdoor spiders as they come out. And then your unit goes over and they come out from behind you facing you and charge you in the back.
Spiders are fucking insane in nature. There's so many different hunting styles. So I would lean into that if I were developing like a big tabletop stuff. For the Total War game, you want to keep things fairly simple. But for tabletop or role play, like go crazy with the different spider types. Like
Totally.
the spiders that make webs and throw them at people, because that's seeing that in nature is fucking insane. Spiders that throw their webs, it's like, ugh, that looks so intelligent. I don't like it.
Yep, agreed.
Aaron, thank you very much.
Hey, Aaron,
Super
thanks
generous.
very
Thank you
much.
so much. Hello, Loremasters. Hope you're having a great day. I wanted to
We
post
are.
this on your stream last Wednesday, but I couldn't make it. So feel free to answer this at the end of your stream. I will post it. Oh, is there a question?
Is there a question attached?
Oh, okay. I see it. I see it. I can look at it real quick. Yeah. Let's see. I can grab it here. Oh, okay. There's like,
That's
it's
part
like
5.
a whole...
There's quite a big one.
Yes, we will. Hey, would you send that to me on Discord?
Yeah, pop it into
Aaron,
Discord.
That
Is
would be
this
better.
about,
Send
if this
it
one's
out.
about corn, we've got an entire thread set up over in Sotek's channel about the Cornate Champion. So pop it up in there, and we can jump in on it after.
Yeah, and I will. We will look at that as soon as the stream's over.
Yeah, totally.
Laughing God, what is something either of you would like to see the spider gods / forest goblins in the old world? If you could write something related to them, so along with the roster expansion, which I think would be much needed for them and really nice. I think for me, delving into, I think what Andy said earlier with diving into like exploring the relationship between the elves and the spider god as a route to explore the spider god without revealing too much about it, keeping it fairly distant and alien, and then allowing that to also serve for showing how exemplary and weird it is that the goblins were able to get an in with the spider god, and showing how unique that relationship is when like something like the elves who have tried in the past failed could make for a really fun
Or shot.
or shunned. Yeah. Either way would make for a really, really good story. That would allow you to see the forest goblins without necessarily revealing too much from their perspective, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we could, because we haven't necessarily dived too much into the Black Pit, you could have a really fun story where some of the Arachnaroks with attendant forest goblins were making their way to the Black Pit from the Border Princes, which is very much where the old world is sitting. So you've got yourself a lovely reason to get the two forces into direct conflict, and gives you an opportunity to both examine why the elves are so deeply against them and actually move against the forest goblins, rather than the forest goblins being the classic antagonists. So you'd always imagine the goblins are the ones that are trying to raid and destroy and be the ones that are causing the issues. But in this case, it's the wood elves going out of their way to attack,
to ambush like this,
to ambush and attack this caravan, which is outside their standard remit, which you could even have if they were, for example, making their way through the edges of the mountains over by the Grey Mountains in the south, or by the Black Mountains, down by the vaults, and then attempt to make themselves up by the edge of the Empire and then scutter into what would be the Reichwald when they eventually reach the northern part, not far away from Nuln. They're trying to avoid civilization, where the elves, being elves, have caught this and make their way over and try to fuck with their shit, causing the local imperial nobles to in turn think that the elves are invading them. You get yourself a lovely setup for a story in there where we've got elves versus empire versus wood elves versus whatever the hell else we decide to throw into that mix. But yeah, I think that it would be fun to effectively do all of that just so that we can begin to examine what the relationships are between these different species.
Yeah,
because there is a huge question mark left open above how the fuck do all the Arachnaroks from across the old world get to the Black Pit when they do their weird migrations there. It's not properly stated, and there has to be routes that they take that allow them to do this with relative safety, because even though they are big fuck off spiders, that's the sort of thing that certain creatures will not allow to pass through their lands. Some will just be like, yeah, I'm just going to hold down, wait for that thing to pass. But it's going to need to eat as it goes. They're big creatures. They need to eat. And that is in turn not going to be very welcome by most places it passes through.
Yeah, two things I would also add is that you could also have a really fun scene from like a in character scene where you have a forest goblin shaman inducing visions and explaining a goblin perspective of why the spider god hates the elves, which could be very comical because greenskins always make everything they do really interesting and often funny, but B, could offer like a really interesting perspective that has some nuggets of truth, but of course you purposely throw in how the greenskins understand something they witnessed, which would be not exactly the truth, but has kernels of truth to it, which could be really interesting.
Yeah, particularly if you did it the other way, because it's nice to make you. It's nice to remember that the Warhammer world is not a world of good guys and bad guys per se. And it would be nice if the Wood Elves were 100% the antagonists here.
Oh yeah,
They are the
that's what
ones
I
who are
mean.
screwing up. So it's not that the Spider God hates the Wood Elves; it's that the Wood Elves hate the Spider God. The Spider God literally couldn't care.
Yeah,
but
so yeah,
they
more of
care.
the shaman explaining why the elves are a threat to
Yeah.
Spider God.
Yeah, totally. And a real threat as well.
And it's like, that's why we're here, lads. That's why we're here.
Yeah, there definitely could be a fun story in that.
The other thing I would say is that studying real world behaviors of spiders, there's a behavior that exists down in South Texas and Mexico that is terrifying if you witness it. But there's a tarantula migration that happens like once a year, or once or twice a year. And it'll literally, like, you'll be driving along and you'll just see, like, it looks like the road in front of you and all of the desert you can see is made of spider. Because it's so many spiders just moving around. Because I used to have a friend of the family who would drive through it, and he talked about the worst thing about it was that if you were driving a big truck and stuff, you drive over them, which you think would squish them, but no, because spiders are horrifying and don't work by the laws of nature. Instead, the spiders, when you would run over them with your tires, they bounce. So they'd bounce when the tire came off of them, and they'd grab onto the bottom of your car. So if you drove over the spider migration, one of the key things is that when you parked wherever you were going, you'd have to wait. They say, don't get out of your car immediately, like turn the car off and wait a little bit, because they'll scatter. So you don't want to get out immediately, or else you're going to have a bunch of tarantulas right around your feet and your legs, which, like, but like doing something with that in Total War, or in the setting, could be really fun. Of like, there's spider migrations that happen from time to time, and like, you know, the Border Princes being like, yeah, we don't go in this area during this time of year, and someone ignores them and is like, oh well, I've got to deliver this thing or whatever, so I'm going.
Multiple spiders.
Yeah, just bad time. Lord Sarthenius. We do a role play with every campaign we do, so is Vlad and Malekith taking control of their respective regions in order to fight chaos in the Skaven end games. We use mods to help the RP. That sounds like super fun.
Yeah, it does.
Kopi Carrion, how would you imagine Arachne or Anansi being incorporated or inspire original creations in the Warhammer world? Anansi would be so fun.
Yeah.
Like one of the Anansi is probably one of the few like African mythological figures that I'm actually relatively well familiar with. Because I try and watch mythological channels that explore other cultures to see what they've got going on. And Anansi was one of the biggest things of like, man, if they developed a genuine like say Zulu Empire inspired type culture where it's got various aspects of African culture woven together to create a human civilization, the deities and the gods you could build in the Warhammer world inspired by the real world ones would be crazy. I mean, Anansi, like the whole story of like how Anansi stole the literal concept of storytelling and brought it back to humanity and gave it to humanity is a wild tale. That is so awesome, of like this trickster spider god who is beneficent because, I mean, he's a trickster god, so he gets into a lot of trouble. But the idea that he steals things for humanity, so you take something that, you know, we often think of very scary and horrifying and gross like a spider, but exploring it from a benevolent angle. And you could have these other peoples that look at a concept like a spider god and go, no, this is a good thing. Like it's a natural predator of really a lot of horrible pests. They bring many gifts to us. They're an important aspect of life, and how that could be such a fascinating, unique dynamic. And Arachne, the same way, you know, the weaver goddess, of having like weaver, a culture of weavers that revere the spider as one of the great weavers of nature. And you'd have the people of the old world being like, what the fuck? But it would make for some beautiful storytelling.
Yeah, I think there's some good in there. Plus, it does start lending you down a particular route where you could really take the forest goblins in a direction that most people don't expect. What if they're not that bad?
Oh, yeah. Oh, God. I mean, forest goblins having weavers would make so much sense.
Yeah,
like,
there could be a lot of fun in that.
How do they make like their artistic representations of the spider god other than just like using like spider bits? Is like, oh no, they like could you imagine if you like you're an adventurer and you stumble into a goblin lair and they have tapestries of spider silk and you go, wait, the fuck, are goblins not what I thought they were? And like,
as I run over most of the stories for the forest goblins, most of them are the forest goblins are doing their thing, forest goblining away. And say, for example, the Empire invades because it wants to chop down their trees. The forest goblins respond by coming out on their spiders, their big, huge arachnorocks, and kicking ass, chewing gum, taking prisoners, and dragging them off. Um, what if they've been tamed by the spider god? I think you can make some really interesting versions of what forest goblins are, because the goblins, the greenskins in particular, are universally one thing, and they're almost dull because of it. They've got a certain lack of variety that means beyond the her, we don't have a lot of culture there that is anything beyond football hooligan from the 1980s. And it's sometimes nice to see the Warhammer world exploring things in different directions as it slowly matures and becomes an older product, which is a little bit more self-aware, and realizing that pitching a species as pure evil is just weird. Now, greenskins have been, over the course of time, often repitched as more of a force of nature, where they are something that just goes. And they aren't evil per se. They just are a tide of war that spills across the world in repeated waves. That's just loosely how they work. And they're often played for humor because it's actually terrible to actually think of how awful they are. So they get all the humorous her sticks. But if we then mix that up with, force of nature, and another part of nature has co-opted a part of it, and it now works a bit differently over here, you could make some interesting stories out of that. It would require a little bit more of a careful hand, because you'd still want forest goblins to be direct allies of, and sometimes caught up with, other WAs, because you'd want to have those odd communities of weird cult spider worshippers.
Well, I almost wonder about the earlier comment of like the fungi starting to affect the spiders. Of what if the spiders are getting caught up in the Wa itself? Like, even the spider god is being affected by Wa energy and is getting like amped up by the Wa. As part of that feedback.
Or the goblins are slipping out of its control, and they're caught up with it, and they're taking everything that they have with them.
Yeah, it's very true.
Either
way is like an interesting.
It can make for a super fun part as well when the Ragnarok literally goes wild and tries to break free. And it's not breaking free because the goblins are treating it badly. It's breaking free because this is not it's thigh.
It's like, what are we doing?
Yeah, exactly. And it just goes town. It goes to town in some orcs, which would be pretty awful. There's definitely some aspect of that that's interesting, because greenskins are lacking in the Warhammer world version of them, at least, a lot of explanation for why they exist and what they are. And it would be nice for some writer somewhere to slowly but surely pick apart at that a bit.
Yeah. One thing I actually think is pertinent to this conversation, really interesting, is so there is a forest goblin special character, which is Snagla Grobspit.
Yeah,
he is very unique among the greenskin special characters, because he fits the forest goblin motif of that he was not aggressive at the start. Snagla Grobspit's entire story is that he was a scout, essentially. He was a fairly young goblin, scout for his tribe. And he was part of the, I think maybe he's where I got, instead of Skullback, I was thinking Venomback, because I think it's the red Venomback is the spider he rides. But he rides a really unique spider that his tribe had an affinity for, was this particular kind of spider. And one day when he was out on like a scouting mission or a raid or something, but he was away from home, he comes back and his tribe has been obliterated. Like the Empire came in, they burned the village down, they killed everyone. And he is enraged.
Sole survivor.
Like he's literally, he's the last surviving goblin of his tribe. And he becomes so filled with black vengeance that he dedicates the rest of his life to getting revenge on the Empire for killing his people, which is a very weird thing for a greenskin.
It is. The whole color of it's different to the other greenskin characters, who are all pretty much warg.
Yeah, just, we're gonna fuck shit up. Yeah. Like for him it's personal.
Yep.
But it fits with the forest goblin motif, where they tend to be a reactionary defensive force, almost not a super offensive force. But he's like he's a sympathetic character among the greenskins, which is really interesting. and just
That's
shows how
one of the
different the
reasons.
forest goblins
Yeah,
are.
I agree completely. It's one of the reasons why I thought it would be nice if we had the wood elves being the primary antagonists as well, because it seems to be, it's not necessarily a theme for the forest goblins, but it seems to be one that's worth picking up and playing a little bit more of, because the greenskins are always antagonists, pretty much always. They're never sympathetic because they're the worst. And they are written so two-dimensionally that
Unless they're
they,
running like Skaven, but yeah.
yeah, totally. They're just the worst. They're generally always the butt of a joke or brought in at the last moment for someone to say, ha ha ha, you thought you were big and hard, but a greenskin just hit you. And you're like, oh, really? And it's the same lazy writing coming again and again. And it would be fun, I think, to start messing it up at least a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, that is super fascinating to think about. Where it's like the forest goblins come off like the most terrifying and grotesque because of the spiders. But when you get over the initial horror of it, you go, they're actually not that bad.
Yeah, I think it would be quite fun to take to go down a route where the spider god is terrifying and animalistic, but also I'm going to use this phrase very, very carefully, but a force for good. And I'm using that very carefully because it's not. More of the balance. Yeah, it's a force of neutrality, perhaps, and has taken this particular set of goblins, and they're using each other. They have a symbiotic relationship. It's not necessarily parasitical. It's not that the goblins have parasited themselves onto the spiders. It's that they're helping each other out. It's a symbiosis, and I think that could definitely mean that we have ourselves a bunch of goblins who are working differently, in the same way that the hobgoblins work very differently to other greenskins, or the noblars work very differently to other greenskins.
One of the
it would be nice to see that mix up a little.
Greenskins, something that's very undervalued about them as a race is that generally speaking, they tend to be very symbiotic with animals that they come across, where it's like the boars, the wyverns, a lot of these creatures, the greenskins, it's funny that yes, they domesticate them, but in a lot of cases, they just sort of live next to them and they just kind of coexist.
Yeah, I want to bring up this one from Quintus, which I don't think is quite getting what I was saying because I might have been expressing it poorly. Where he says, I'd actually argue that the rest of the greenskins being that simplistic and one-dimensional is worth keeping just to give the forest goblins this kind of wonderful contrast. I agree. That's the point I'm trying to make. I'm not saying greenskins need to change. If anything, greenskins are greenskins, and I think they're brilliant. I really like them. But I do feel that some of them are so exceedingly one-dimensional that they begin to lose any sense of being a realistic thing. And this would be one way that we could take a look at the greenskins and say there are different ways they can express, not so that we change the rest, so that we can look at this and go, look, this is another way they can express, and this brings some cultural differences between the greenskins. So when a Wa comes up and the forest goblin group comes in, there's some they're the weirdos. They are the weirdos. We don't get mixed with them because, just don't get too close. They're high in spider venom. They're totally out of it. Even the bad ones
it's just the idea of their spiders don't like us, and they will kill you. Don't get
they will kill you. Yeah, totally. There's quite a lot there. So, loosely speaking, I agree with you entirely. Just to make sure that that's clear, because I love the greenskins as they are, and I think that Warhammer greenskins have taken their orcs and their goblins into quite a new space that is worthwhile keeping.
Yep, Aaron, you're not a moron, my dude. And
not at all.
Oh, good, you found it. Wonderful. I will literally check that out as soon as the stream's over. Charles CK, super cool to have a story with four goblins reject joining a larger WA because of their theological / cultural differences.
Yeah.
Maybe even attack them instead. Yeah, I would. Although, when you have a WA, it tends to be lots of groups just kind of disorganizedly just going in the same direction and joining up. It's usually not nearly as organized as it may seem like it is. It's more of just a tide that just happens to work together. But there are, animosity is the whole concept of infighting is very natural to greenskins.
It is.
So the idea that you'd have forest goblins who attack a WA because it gets close to their territory, or they kind of join alongside it, but they attack if anybody gets too close or has various disagreements with them, makes perfect sense. You could even have that if you were dealing with a particularly clever goblin or orc war boss, that they talk to their shamans. They're like, hey, I want those big spiders to help us with attacking this empire city that's got these big walls and stuff. I want those spiders. And the shaman does shaman stuff and goes, oi, they say we need to make an offering to their spider git. We need to appease their god. And the orc's like, okay, fine, whatever, just do it. There could be a fun story there of the politics of dealing internally as a war boss, either a goblin or an orc war boss. There a lot of comedy there, but B, a lot of genuinely interesting storytelling there of how they might have to satiate if they want a particular group to come along with them.
Yeah, there's a lot in that potentially. Agreed.
Swars, you guys just helped my D&D campaign out dramatically. Haha, gonna have to flesh out this idea with goblins and giant spiders. Our apologies to your players.
I love you, Swars, but why aren't you playing Warhammer?
Yeah, really, just play Wolfram. D&D.
just saying. Enjoy your D&D. I'm literally about to release a D&D book on a different thing, so I literally have no leg to stand on over here. I've got a D&D book I'm getting released.
I got 8 of them.
So so yeah, just ignore that. But nevertheless, play Warhammer.
Yeah, Laughing God would love to see more forest goblins in the same vein as the spidery looking one in the AOS Gobblepalooza models. Yeah, the Gobblepalooza is a very hilarious model. It's super fun because it has a bunch of different. They're not shamans, but you could, if you were playing fantasy, you would probably treat them as goblin shamans. But one of them is very spidery. They each kind of have a different theme. Where like one's all about mushrooms, one's all about like spiders, one's all about like brewing, one's about like little critters and stuff, but they're fun. But yeah, I agree. Lord Sarthenius, they're the weirdos. Reminds me of Sotek's Azhag video back in the day with the something wrong with the boss. Yeah, well, to be fair, that is one of my favorite direct quotes about Azhag is the greenskins. Azhag Nagash's spirit possessing him when he makes this big speech about tactics, and all the greenskins look at him and they look at each other and they go, the boss is talking funny, but he keeps winning, so whatever. Like, whatever, we'll just keep fighting for him, even though he says weird shit. Yeah. He doesn't talk very orky.
I love Azhag.
Aaron, quick question. I go spider today. Should I be scared?
Yes.
Yeah, of course, obviously. One of the things that would be really interesting would, if you wanted to explore the spider god as like a developed entity, is like, to what extent is it like, oh, nature is nature, like, its children are killed and eaten, that's just part of the cycle, versus someone like, say, the Empire wantonly killing and burning down brood nests and killing lots of spiders. Does a creature like that develop vengeance?
Yes.
Does it look at it looks at them and goes, all right, fuck you guys, let's go.
And the reason that I would generally say yes to that is because it's almost a storytelling trope for crossing the big creature in the wild and it comes to bite you back. There's a standard of movies of the ilk, whether it's just the more ridiculous versions like Jaws, where you go deal with the big shark and the shark bites you back, or whatever it might be. I think the general thing would be, if you go and take a bite at the spider god's going to spit venom in your direction. It's going to be awful. And they're going to swarm out the forest with their forest goblins in attendance. And it's all going to go very, very wrong for you. Plus, that builds a very Warhammer style story where ultimately it's going to be a tit for tat exchange of warfare. That's just basically where Warhammer always lands anyway. And then you can start to undermine it using whichever particular best story techniques worst for the story that you're using at hand. But I would definitely, I think, have vengeance be a core component of it. You kill its kids, it will kill you. It's pretty blunt.
Farseer Iridel, I will say I am very excited for what they're going to do with the Spider Gun AOS, because it really is like the one undeveloped aspect of the Gloomspite gets. And there's been a lot of rumors floating around that they're going to get an update in the near future. With spiders being the main theme, which is very exciting because the Spider God in AOS is really, really fun. Being that all of the destruction gods are different entities or concepts that have somehow wounded or survived Gorka Morka and basically sucked off a little bit of his godly energy and became God themselves. With the Spider God, I love the Spider God so much. Having already been a giant spider god beast, Gorka Morka was making a mess in its lair, and it scuttled up and bit him in the foot and sucked up some of his god juice. And he was like, fuck, spider, this giant spider. And it scuttled away and was a god now, which is great.
Interesting. So you heard it here first, folks. Spider God sucks off Gorka Morka. Perfect.
Yeah, hell yeah.
That is definitely a thing.
Can I get a little bit of that god goo, please?
Yeah, I do find many of the tales of Age of Sigmar as very, very Age of Sigmar. Take that as you will.
Space opera.
Yeah,
that's what I like to call it.
And I'm not sure how I would best translate what is clearly the spider deity through, but I think that's because the spider god, as it currently stands, is equally not necessarily well understood or defined. We have ourselves just a few instances of the deity being mentioned in the books.
Yeah, like 2 paragraphs.
Yeah, totally. And these few instances are relatively inconsistent as well. The very, very first examples, all the way back, were nothing more than the forest goblins have ditched Mork and Gork. They've got a spider god. Hey! Da da da! And then they just walk off without giving any explanation at all. And you're left going, well, that's a thing. What the fuck? Because at that point, Gork and Mork were orc and goblin deities, and that's it. There is no equivalent. If you went back a generation, back to the 3rd edition of Warhammer, that's where you start getting some weirder options. Like, for example, some orcs worship corn. There's a thing that you would never get nowadays. And that got changed for the new edition. And then they dropped in with equal merit an entire section of greenskins that did not worship Mork or Gork. And from the expectation of what the orcs and goblins were going to be, that was pretty huge. But they never ran with it. It just didn't happen. And it took 30 years before we eventually got detail. And that detail was dark, relatively scary, and quite clearly laced, as it often is with goblins, with drugs. In their case, the drugs being venom-based. It was a nice and relatively clean update for the greenskins because it didn't say, so here's our Native American version of greenskins, and oh no. Instead, what it did was it focused hard on the spider aspect, the scary, nasty deity that sat in an almost cosmic beyond, like it was a Cthulhu-like entity that they had managed to somehow contact with. And it was hungry. A hungry entity, which in many respects, as we've covered during the course of the stream, very much reinforces the idea that it is an almost animalistic deity. It is driven by primal urges in the same way that all creatures are. They are there to eat, they are there to have sex, they are there to sleep, and whatever they do in between, if it needs an in-between, their brain gives them tasks to do, like build webs or whatever it is that it happens to do. And they just work through it by rote. They're not doing it because they're clever. They're doing it because that's what their pre-programming has them do. And we've got an entity that's perhaps driving that from behind and making the Arachnaroks, if anything, even more sinister and powerful than you might first imagine. The Arachnaroks might be literally divine. And that is a horrendous place. There's a reason that the goblins couldn't tame them. There's a reason that the goblins aren't stupid, regardless of how they're often portrayed as a source of humor, because writers are lazy and they forget that these are horrendous creatures, truly, truly horrendous creatures. They're not small. They're almost as tall as humans. They're stronger than humans, and they are extremely adaptable and often perceived, at least in greenskin terms, as the clever ones. They're just as clever as people, as humans. They're as capable of problem solving, as capable as dealing with things. And they are super, super cunning rather than necessarily over reflective. But they could not figure it out how to get past them, and instead turned to worship to make it work, which in turn worked. So it does give you the sense that if you run by what the goblins believe, we have a very real entity, a proper, powerful entity in the forests that is separate from the other ones, has built itself up effectively an enormous shrine that's sitting inside the center of the Drakvold, where not just one or two or 20, but multiple enormous Arachnaroks that make the normal Arachnaroks look like babies live. And the goblins don't go down there because they're terrified of it. Because almost that's where their god lives, the black pit over there. It's the freaking worst. And not only is this black pit in the center of the Drakvold something that you could argue is divine because, you know, they're down there doing their stuff. It quite literally almost certainly is, because Arachnaroks from across the world migrate there like it's a freaking holy site to do what? Are they there to give themselves over? Are they there to make supplications to their god? Are Arachnaroks more clever than some think, or are they less clever? But they go. They are making their pilgrimages over to that place, regardless of Mount Arachnos or any other of the various spidery sites that might exist around the world. They are all gathering into the center of the Drakvold. That makes for great stories, because that means there is, on an almost decade-based cycle large, enormous, fuck off kaijus making their way towards the Drakvold. This is something that has never been mentioned anywhere, so you need to make stories for it. How do they get from A to B? What routes do they take where they don't get spotted? It has to happen relatively infrequently, but it does happen once every 10 years or so. So there's loads of cool stories that you can develop out of this.
Yeah, you'd probably be working with like a natural migratory route, like with birds or other such creatures in our world. So then you have the idea of stupid humans or stupid elves or stupid dwarfs building or interrupting these migratory routes, which is going to cause a big fucking problem.
Yeah. And it's going to happen sometimes. And that makes for immediate potential conflicts between spider goblin tribes, some of whom may be going with their effective gods. So you might get actual whole spider tribes going off and making their way up towards the Black Pit, turning round and making their way back to where their individual territories are. Or sometimes, perhaps these Arachnaroks are literally taking all their sacrifices with them, as all the spiders, as all the goblins are just sucked down into the pit for whatever hellish reason this spider god has got down in the bottom. It does feel like the Black Pit is arguably a much more important site than many realize, because we don't have any other equivalent. But the fact that there are so many giant ones down there really does make it somewhere unique and special that I think is worth mentioning.
Okay, let's see. We have a couple more super chats come in here right at the end.
Oh, we're nearing at the end now.
Yep. Nasser, I think I get on good with these guys. Killing spiders is considered religiously disliked for me. I think we have some common ground. Yeah, I mean, realistically, you'd probably be like who the Empire would consider the old weirdo that lives out in the forest and it's like, don't kill the spiders, respect the spiders, and they'll respect you. And they go, humbug, and then they chop down a tree with a bunch of spiders in it, kill them, and then they get attacked by spiders.
I actually quite like the idea for forest goblins as well, perhaps giving different reasons for forest goblins to interact with humanity rather than just the classic, oh, they found me, we're dead now. They are the ones who will actively pursue those that interfere with their religious rights, whether it is their totems that they've got in place, whether it's spiders in general, don't fuck with the spiders, and how that would then translate into local imperial communities, some of which may have been lost entirely as a Ragnarok came out and encircled it with web, so they could never get out and they could just be eaten over the course of half a year.
Like, could you imagine playing a roleplay character where here's a pitch for anyone in chat. Imagine like you're playing a character whose whole thing is that as a child, like you grew up in a family that was like, no, we treat all animals with respect. We don't kill them unnecessarily. If you find a spider, just lift it up and take it back outside and like treat spiders with respect their whole life. And then one day in a Ragnarok circles the village. They're being attacked by forest goblins and spiders and killed. And then your character, who's like a kid, maybe he's 10, 11 years old, his parents are gone. The goblins are like, no, don't hurt that one. That one gets to leave because he's always been respectful. And the goblins, like the Ragnarok even, lets you pass in front of it and doesn't attack. Like, that could be a fucking wild foundation for a really cool character.
Yeah, you can make some really cool cards. I mean, just being a survivor of an Ragnarok attack, because your parents put you right down beneath the building or whatever, and they all got pulled away by the Ragnarok and turned into gloop as they fed from their bodies over the course of 2 or 3 weeks, and then eventually the spider web drifts away and you can find your way out and you're the only one that survives. Ragnaroks are horrible. So yeah, there's definitely something in that.
But it's like you could play a guy that's like, no, I don't think goblins are that bad, and everyone's like, what?
Yeah, definitely get something like that. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, actually, fun fact, if you read the Skarsnik novel, which fantastic novel, one of my favorite Black Library novels, Skarsnik's amazing. One of the main characters who's trying to learn about goblins, his obsession with them, you find out later in the book, is because he was in a coach and his brother, they were in a coach together and they get attacked by forest goblins, and his brother, a spider comes in through a window, grabs his brother and pulls his brother out, and his brother's never seen again. And that memory haunts him for the rest of his life. And it's described in very vivid detail. And it's like, that's fucking nightmare fuel. That is nightmare fuel. Because he's like the only survivor of it. And it's like, ooh. Could the idea of hungry be for every god, as they are hungry for souls and worship? I think it would depend on the god.
I'm going to hard bounce off that one, because I do like doing that every once in a while, and say that Warhammer gods are not universally hungry for souls and worship. Indeed, I would argue Many of them, most of them, don't want worship at all. They don't want worship. They aren't worshipped. It's a weird state of affairs. They don't exist because people worship them. They exist because of the very nature of how the aether works. They don't need worship. Now, you could argue that they need sentience because the very nature of sentience means that people will reflect and amend the aether because the aether reacts to sentience. So you could argue every time someone's angry, the anger god gets a bit more whooshy. If every time someone gets sad, the sad god gets a bit more swooshy. But that doesn't mean there's any worship involved in the slightest. There's no worship. There's no one sitting down and saying, I am particularly angry today because I am worshipping. It's not how it works with Warhammer. This is not small gods. This is not the worship gives answer to a particular thing. Although in some respects it is small gods because it's the very nature of people being people that creates them. Now that's again one type of god. It's not the only type of etheric entity that there is out there. So I would argue this one is no. Actually,
yeah,
I would say no.
Yeah, I would say you will find etheric entities who greedily desire worship
because they are greed.
Yeah, and they want it more than anything. And there are some texts that suggest that worship can make some gods more powerful.
Or so they believe.
Yeah, or so they believe, which if you want to run with that, you can. The dark gods are very
They love that stuff.
About that concept. But whether or not that's true, there are gods that exist that fly in the face of that. Mm-hmm. Where you have gods like Sotek, which indicate that, worship and sacrifice are great for gods and they feed on it. But then you have gods like a lot of the elven gods that don't require things like that.
Nope, none.
You simply acknowledge them out of respect and in the hopes that they'll aid you when the time comes. Or some of the gods you'll encounter in the old world, the reason you acknowledge them isn't to worship them; it's so you don't piss them off. Mm-hmm. And so they'll leave you alone. So, would the spider god be on par with entities such as Hashut or the Great Maw? I say it's very impossible to answer that. Because the spider god is very reserved in what it does.
Yeah, so the spider god is like spiders themselves. It's creeping around in the darker recesses of the world. It prefers not to be spotted. I think the answer to that is possibly yes, but it's as much a possibility as anything else. Because as we know, orcs and goblins, by their very nature, appear not to affect the aether in the same way. They affect the physical reality. They cause magic to appear here. They don't cause reflections to swirl and eddy in the warp in the same way. And if anything, you might argue they're shadows in the warp by comparison, because they cause the warp to go and react differently. So you could argue that they are useless to the gods if that's how you believe that gods work. But in this case, the spider god clearly has a lot to do with these greenskins because it aids them significantly. So do I think they're on par? It's impossible to answer. But if I was writing it, I'm not going to change it differently. It doesn't matter. There's no on par. They're just different entities. That's a little bit like saying, am I on par with Sotek? No, we're just two different humans at different ages in our life.
Would all love to see a punch up between gods. That virtually never happens. It is implied that it can happen, maybe, but it seems like something that gods just don't do the vast majority of the time. Either because they can't or because it's too risky. But often it seems like for gods to fight, there has to be something very specific that goes down.
And it's a little bit like saying, let's have the sea fight the land.
Yeah, it's like how they just exist.
Yeah, the land and the sea are constantly at each other, but it doesn't mean that the sea is actually ever going to win in a fight against the land.
Yeah, they're not going to start. Yeah,
they're just different things. They're sitting beside each other.
Yeah, what you would see would be like avatars or priests or incarnations fighting one another. Sure. But like the gods themselves, yeah.
And similarly, you'll see storms and giant waves lashing against the cliffs and making everything feel like, whoa, look at that war. But that, again, they're just two different things.
Yeah, like I'll put it this way: the only text I know of where you have literal punching happening between gods is a scene in the end times, and it doesn't even like end up doing anything. Like Nurgle like essentially punches Tall and like knocks him out, only for the story to be like, oh, and then all the gods get together and heal Tall, and there's no repercussions and no references for the rest of the end times about gods fighting. So it was like the most random side storyline.
It's a thing.
Yeah, but as far as like power and influence is concerned, the Spider God is very subtle. Like,
Yeah, very.
you know, Hashit and the Great Maw are loud, boisterous, very like powers. The Spider God is very subtle. Like he would be, it would be like he's almost out there with like the likes of Loek or Ronald or these almost like more these much quieter gods who are probably much more powerful and influential than you think they are.
He's a
But-
god.
Yeah,
What
he's
more
a god,
power do you
yeah.
need?
So according to Sotek, Shelob crossed over to Elder Scrolls to give Malakath the Glock 9000 to retrieve Nirvana. Yeah, that's exactly what I said.
WTF?
Yeah, I stand by that. Mornington Crescent, Forest Goblin starting a to
I like that.
clear a path for the migrating Ragnarok. Yeah. Well,
I
mean,
think
about
that is great.
from a greenskin perspective, your god is getting up, which he hasn't in decades, maybe longer, maybe as long as your tribe can remember. And he goes on the move. You go, we're going on a war. We're going on the war path. And the shaman climbs up on the shambling howdah and is like, yeah, here we go. Yeah, that would kickstart a war for the forest goblins. Is their god is on the move. Like there are shamans in greenskin culture that are described as they believe was are Gork and Mork going on the move. And the tribes are merely representations of that. The forest goblins would see that very much the same with the Ragnaroks. And it would be horrifying to be in the way of. Get the fuck out of the way.
Yep. Careful.
Aaron Trevor, a wadding contest? Great Maw versus Spider God? I don't know what wadding is.
Eating contest. Eating contest.
Yeah.
Eating
E
contest.
is next to W. You're correct.
Great Maw wins.
Yeah, Great Maw would absolutely curb stomp everybody.
And I think,
everybody.
And actually, to take a different view on, say, the power of a god, I think that actually speaks quite cleanly to it. Each of the gods have got their own strengths and their own weaknesses, their own things they can do and they can't do. Power, ultimately, in a real world sense, is almost the ability to influence resources. Power is nothing more than being able to get what you want to eat, to live, to survive, to own the land so that you've got freedom to do whatever you want or whatever else it is. In the end, power and politics that are influencing it all kind of move back to getting what you want. And getting what you want for the spider god is simply being left alone, eating, being left alone. It's hungry and eating. And in that regards, it has all the power it needs because it's got all these forest goblins that are basically shunting everything that it wants in its direction. So you could argue it is literally as powerful as it needs to be. And trying to compare gods when they've got such different needs makes it very difficult to come up with an actual answer that makes much sense.
Yeah. And plus, like, I mean, if you're asking a question like that, my counter would be, well, who would win in a web weaving contest? The Great Maw or the Spider God?
Yeah. Spider God.
Yeah.
He's one.
Spider God. Yeah. So it just depends
He's one,
on
I think.
what, all that stuff going on. All right. With that, we are out of time.
Are we running out of time already?
It's 3 hours.
Oh, wow. Okay, so my little conclusion in all of that one is that there's obviously not a lot written about the Spider God. But that, nevertheless, I think opens the door for us to have a big, long chat about what it could be and how it could be represented in the Warhammer world. And often, because it's directly attached to one of the smaller factions, how we could take that faction and make it something a bit bigger, a bit more interesting, and something that reflects the lore and what it's suggested might be the case, but hasn't actually properly done it. So in this case, we've got ourselves a deity, a god that is clearly, to the forest goblins at least, extremely powerful. We can't determine its nature, as in, let's try and tier out the gods. Is this an S tier god, or are we sitting at an F tier god? That's not what we're dealing with here. We are dealing with a god that is directly influencing the world through the Arachnaroks. And the Arachnaroks have taken in the forest goblins and they use them like little helper monkeys, as we said earlier, much like the ogres are using the Noblars like little helper monkeys. And they are helping the Arachnaroks get to the Black Pit, which is in the Drakvald, and back away from it as well. So it's not so much that they're having great wars, it's more that they're having migrations, going along with their Arachnaroks and doing stuff. What's that one there?
Not a lot written, but 3 hours.
Yeah, because us.
Lorebeards.
And by that interesting situation, we've got a whole culture of greenskins that are different. They are ones that are very much wrapped around tending these great creatures and protecting them from any threats that might come their way. Most of the lore we have is them being threatened and reacting hard, not them coming out and kicking ass and chewing gum, which is the greenskin standard. So in many respects, you also get a tone of the god behind it. This is not like Mork and Gork. This is not someone that's, strong and cunning or whatever else it might be. This is a god that is subtle, that is careful, but is also pretty goddamn vengeful. Because if you cross it, it's going to hunt you down and eat you. And the Arachnaroks themselves are a good indication for what the god might be like. They are scary predators, top tier, scary predators. They can take down almost anything. Indeed, they will take down entire communities when they are hungry. And they are also careful and slow about
kill entire beastman herds. Like,
yeah, totally. Lord. So there's an entire beastman herd there. They wake up the next day and they find out that they are surrounded by web that goes right up to the tree line and higher, and they can't get past it. There is no way out, and the Arachnarok will take its time, killing them over weeks. It doesn't do it immediately. It's patient. And that gives you an idea of an entire set of greenskins that are just different. And for me, that's fascinating. As we've said throughout the course of the stream, doing something where we take the greenskins and we take them beyond their standard stereotype of, all right, lads, let's go get him, hor, 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 whoa, is good. Because that's pretty much all we have for greenskins. And obviously, there's lots of different variations of that. We have our night goblins, or we have our hobgoblins, or there's lots of different variations, but ultimately they're all a bit different shades of the same gray, where in this case it's a bit of color, and it's a bit of color. I should have said different shades of the same green. This is a different color than just the green. This is somewhere where we're getting ourselves some purple back running through. Yeah, that monochrome. Oh, yeah, that's what I should have gone. God damn it. I want to redo this particular conclusion. This is monochrome. And the realm of the god of shadows, the god of spiders, the god of dark places, is a dark black and white place, which is vengeful and bleak, but also based on hunger and some interesting, let's say, migratory pattern, which we have not really got an answer to, but is certainly fascinating. What are they doing? And whilst we could make various conjectures as to what they're doing, I think leaving it unanswered is better. Leaving it mysterious is better. In that there's this great, huge making its way through towards the Drakvald for no reason other than, well, it's gone and we never see it again.
Yeah. There's a lot of fun you could have with that, especially of like other greenskins getting caught up with it. And then you have that push-pull of the other greenskins, and some of the goblins kind of want to go attack all these cities and stuff, but the spider's like, nah, I'm going this way. And it leads to like this contest of wills, which is really fun.
Yeah, that was a fun one. We got I particularly want to call out all the questions. You really did help channel us in a variety of different directions.
Yeah, excellent questions. Question, Mr. Law. Have you considered introducing the spider god in the Enemy Within?
I did. I considered having it as part of the journey between where they were to where they currently are without giving any spoilers, but chose not to do it because it was outside the remit of the core direction of the campaign as it currently sits. Has it got a potential space in the future? It does, but it's going to depend entirely on events that are going to occur. And again, I don't want to give any spoilers, but if things progress as I expect, and if we continue on, it will very possibly be a core component of the third campaign. But that's only if we get that far. We'll see if we do campaign 1. Campaign 1 is about the Enemy Within. Let's see if we go to campaign 2, which is all about making our way to Lustria, assuming that we do it. And campaign 3 is coming back and seeing what state the Empire is in.
How big do you think an Ragnarok egg is? I bet it's not as big as you think it is.
Yeah.
But there's
imagine those little white.
Because the thing about spiders is they don't tend to have singular large eggs. They have clusters of thousands, but they're itty bitty.
Yeah.
And like it would probably be the same. Granted, an itty bitty in this case might be the size of like your finger or your hand, which is very large for a spider, but compared to a Ragnarok, it's quite small. But yeah. Aaron, I was just about to ask you this. Hyojion, thank you. I will look out for you in the Blood God thread as soon as I get out of here.
Excellent.
But yeah, this was a really, really fun one. I was definitely like, I think this is the least amount of text we've had to work on for Lorebeards before.
Yeah.
but it's a really fascinating subject. CB4 and 50 Shades of Greenskins Black Library novel win. I don't know if I like that name. There are goblins in my dungeon. Thank you all so much for joining us. We hope you enjoyed this. I think there was a lot of really interesting things here that work super duper well. We have super exciting streams coming up. Of course, on Wednesday, we're going to be doing the Slanesh Brother of Tarmakon.
Oh, yeah, Slanesh.
Creation stream, which is going to be super fun. Me and Andy already kicked around a couple ideas, and then I looked in the Slanesh thread on the Lorehammer Discord, which I will have linked in the top comment here. And Hawk, if you're here, could you post a link to Andy's Discord for that, if you'd be so kind in both chats? Because there's already a discussion thread going on about the Slanesh Brother, just like there's a discussion thread in my Discord about the Spider God and Khorne going on right now. And the stuff I've read in the Khorne thread and the Slanesh thread in particular have been amazing.
Yeah, they've been awesome.
Genuinely amazing. Like there's been fan art and stuff like that. And we fucking love that shit. We probably need to make like some fun posts about the art y'all send us. Because I can't think of anything that's more like humbling to get as a content creator than fan art. Like that's fucking like top tier shit.
It's always the best, isn't it? Also, just as a complete aside, I'm going to be doing a mapping tutorial over on Inside the Rookery next week. And over on the Rookery channel, there's a suggestion thread for anyone who wants to have ideas for what sort of thing I'm going to be mapping. And
is that for the Saturday stream?
No, that's
it's
a patrony bonusy one for those who are patrons over there. And that's going to be next, I think it's next Thursday. It's lined up for Thursday in the evening UK time, so around about 7 p.m. UK time on Thursday. And I've done like about 17, no, not that many, about 10 previous mapping ones, and one of them was even showing people how to do Fallout maps. So if you want to do a map like Fallout, so if anyone's got any ideas of a different type of map style that they'd like to see a tutorial for, if you go into the Rookery Discord, so that's a third Discord, just to really confuse things up, go into there. There's a thread set up for it. I've got links for it over in the Lorehammer one already over in the promotions side, because it's kind of a promotion for the Rookery. So if you do have any ideas of stuff that you'd like to see learn how to map, go tell me, because I'm about to do a big mapping stream on it. So that's going to be super fun.
All right. Okay, we had one more super chat come in from Sign here right at the end. Look forward to seeing what Sotek thinks of primals in Final Fantasy 14, how many parallel lesser gods of Warhammer. Also ever checked out any, I think he's addressing that to you, Andy, Final Fantasy 14 or plans to do so in the future?
So I played it right at the very beginning. It was rubbish. And it got bluntly, it was rubbish.
Very infamously, yes.
Yeah, it was. And I desperately wanted to like it, Final Fantasy fan that I am, and it was rubbish. And I came back to it about a year later after it being tidied, and it was fine, but I was already sort of tainted by the whole previous affair, and I didn't really get on with it as much as I could have. So I haven't played it for however many years it was since it was first released.
I find it super funny that apparently the initial release was so bad that their go-to was like, all right, let's blow it up and start over.
It was like, bad. It was okay. It was just so bland. That's why it was bad.
I hear it's one of the greatest gaming stories in gaming nowadays.
Is it interesting? I may, but I've got so much on my plate. I mean, once my at the moment I'm playing on my computer right now. I've done my first campaign for Total War, but it's not connected to the internet. So I had a quick go of Cathay just to try it all out, and that was super fun. But I don't have that much free time. So over the course of the next so many weeks, once my computer's actually attached to the internet and I can go online, I know. I feel like I'm back in the 1800s over here. But once it's up and going and I can do everything, I have so many games that I want to at least try out. So watch this space, but I can't see Final Fantasy 14 being high on my list. No.
There you go. All right, so that is going to be it for us today. Just a reminder that the vote for next Lorebeards will be here on my channel. We're going to go figure that out here right after stream. So I will have that up very shortly because we want to make sure we get those up in advance for y'all. So thank you all very much for watching. And Andy, unless you got any closing words, I think we're out of here.
I don't, other than thanks so much. You've all been awesome.
All right, we'll see you later. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye-bye. See you Wednesday. Bye. I didn't click the button. Did you click the button?